Shrouded in thick, reflective clouds, Venus shines brightly in the sky, earning it the title of morning star and evening star throughout human history. Beneath that beauty lies a world of extremes, crushing pressures, searing temperatures, and an atmosphere filled with sulfuric acid. It's a planet that seems utterly inhospitable. But for years, scientists have wondered if Venus was once more like Earth. A planet with oceans, a temperate climate, and perhaps even life. What went so wrong? Could life still exist in its skies today? And if we could, should we try to make Venus habitable again? Let's embark on a journey through the history, mysteries, and possibilities of Venus, exploring what we know, what we've yet to discover, and the bold ideas that might one day transform this hellish planet into something extraordinary. First impressions: a sister planet with perpetual clouds. Venus is often called Earth's sister planet, and the comparison is not without merit. At first glance, Venus shares many of the fundamental characteristics that define our own planet. It is nearly the same size, only slightly smaller, with a diameter of about 12,104 kilometers compared to Earth's 12,742 kilometers. This close similarity in size results in a comparable gravitational pull on their surfaces, with Venus's gravity measuring around 90% of Earth's. Like Earth, Venus is a rocky terrestrial planet, composed primarily of silicate rocks and metals. Its dense metallic core is believed to be similar to Earth's, surrounded by a mantle of silicate materials that have shaped its surface through volcanic activity. Evidence of vast volcanic plains, mountain ranges, and large impact craters suggests that Venus, like Earth, has undergone a dynamic geological history. Positioned as the second planet from the Sun, Venus lies just inside Earth's orbit. It sits at an average distance of about 108 million kilometers from the Sun, compared to Earth's 150 million kilometers. This proximity means that Venus receives nearly twice the solar energy that Earth does, a factor that has had profound consequences for its environment. Despite this, Venus's position still places it within the inner solar system, close enough to the Sun that early in its history, it might have shared conditions suitable for liquid water, one of the critical factors for life as we know it. Venus's thick atmosphere, composed mainly of carbon dioxide, creates a runaway greenhouse effect that traps heat and raises surface temperatures to an average of about 475 degrees Celsius. This extreme heat, combined with atmospheric pressures 92 times greater than Earth's, makes Venus an incredibly hostile environment. The divergence in Venus's path also extends to its lack of a significant magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field, generated by its rotating liquid outer core, plays a crucial role in protecting its atmosphere from being stripped away by solar winds. Venus, on the other hand, has only a weak induced magnetic field, a consequence of its slow rotation and possibly a different internal structure. This absence of a robust magnetic shield has left Venus's atmosphere vulnerable to solar radiation, contributing to its unique evolution and extreme conditions. Venus's thick cloud cover is one of its most striking features. From a distance, the planet shines brilliantly in the sky, earning it the nickname morning star or evening star, depending on when it is visible. This brightness is not due to any inherent glow, but to the planet's highly reflective atmosphere. The clouds surrounding Venus are made of sulfuric acid droplets, which are exceptionally good at scattering sunlight. As a result, Venus reflects about 75% of the sunlight that reaches it, making it the brightest object in the sky after the Sun and the Moon. For centuries, these perpetual clouds shrouded Venus in mystery. Early astronomers, observing through telescopes, could see no surface features, only the smooth, glowing appearance of its atmosphere. This lack of visible detail led to wild speculation about what lay beneath. Some imagined a lush tropical world teeming with life, assuming the clouds were indicative of water vapor and rain. Others proposed dense swamps or endless oceans hidden below the thick veil. These ideas persisted for much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, fueled by the planet's proximity to Earth. and the belief that such a similar world must also share some of Earth's life-supporting characteristics. The reality of Venus's clouds, however, turned out to be far less hospitable. When spacecraft began studying the planet in the mid-20th century, they revealed an atmosphere that was not water-rich, but instead dominated by carbon dioxide, with clouds composed almost entirely of sulfuric acid. These clouds form in the upper atmosphere, where sulfur dioxide gas reacts with water vapor under the influence of ultraviolet light from the sun. The result is a dense layer of acidic droplets, suspended high above the surface, creating a continuous and impenetrable blanket. These clouds play a crucial role in the extreme conditions on Venus. They trap heat with incredible efficiency. The clouds also block nearly all visible light from reaching the surface, creating a dim, reddish-orange environment below. For any spacecraft or instruments attempting to study Venus, this thick atmospheric layer poses a significant challenge. Radar technology has become the primary tool for peering through the clouds and mapping the planet's surface, providing a clearer picture of its geology and terrain. High-altitude winds, traveling at speeds of up to 360 kilometers per hour, whip the clouds around the planet in a phenomenon known as superrotation. This means that while Venus itself rotates very slowly, taking 243 Earth days to complete one rotation, its atmosphere moves much faster, circling the planet in just a few Earth days. These high-speed winds create swirling patterns and turbulence, giving the clouds a dynamic and ever-changing appearance when observed in ultraviolet light. The sulfuric acid clouds also give Venus its yellowish-white color, a hue that is visible even from Earth. The clouds are also a source of danger for any spacecraft attempting to explore the planet. The sulfuric acid is highly corrosive, requiring specially designed materials and protective coatings to withstand the environment. The cloud's density and opacity also make navigation and communication challenging, as signals from orbiting spacecraft must penetrate the thick layers to reach the surface or return data to Earth. Despite these difficulties, missions like NASA's Magellan and ESA's Venus Express have successfully studied the planet, uncovering valuable information about its atmosphere and surface. The Lost Oceans. Was Venus once a water world? Venus, with its scorching surface and arid plains, seems like the last place one would associate with water. Yet evidence suggests that in its distant past, Venus may have been a planet rich in liquid water. The idea that Venus once harbored oceans stems from clues found in its atmosphere and geological history, painting a picture of a world that could have been vastly different from the hostile environment we see today. Scientists have detected an unusually high ratio of deuterium to hydrogen in the planet's upper atmosphere. Deuterium is a heavier isotope of hydrogen, and its abundance compared to ordinary hydrogen provides insights into Venus's history. On Earth, water molecules consist of two hydrogen atoms bonded to an oxygen atom. When exposed to intense solar radiation, as Venus's atmosphere has been for billions of years, lighter hydrogen atoms are more likely to escape into space, leaving behind the heavier deuterium. The high concentration of deuterium on Venus suggests that vast amounts of water were once present but have since been lost to space. Some models suggest that early Venus may have had enough water to form shallow oceans, covering large portions of the planet's surface. Others propose a more modest amount, with water existing primarily in the atmosphere as steam or in smaller localized bodies. Either way, the presence of water would have made Venus a very different world from the one we see today. Being closer to the Sun, Venus receives nearly twice the solar energy that Earth does, and this intense heat likely caused any liquid water on its surface to evaporate quickly, creating a thick, water-rich atmosphere. Without a magnetic field to shield it, the solar wind gradually stripped away much of this atmosphere, carrying hydrogen and other light molecules into space. Over time, this process left Venus dry and barren, with its remaining carbon dioxide dominating the atmosphere and driving the runaway greenhouse effect that persists today. Early in its history, Venus might have shared similarities with Earth, including a temperate climate and the potential for habitable conditions. However, small differences in distance from the Sun and the absence of protective mechanisms, like a magnetic field, caused its climate to spiral out of control. Some regions of Venus, such as the tesserae, feature rugged, complex terrain that could have been shaped by tectonic activity and the presence of liquid water. These highland areas are among the oldest parts of the planet's surface, and their composition may hold clues to the role water played in Venus's early history. Future missions to Venus aim to study these regions in greater detail, using advanced instruments to analyze the chemical makeup of rocks and search for signs of past water interaction. If liquid water existed on the planet's surface for millions or even billions of years, it might have provided the conditions necessary for microbial life to develop. However, as Venus's climate became increasingly hostile, any such life would have faced enormous challenges. Whether life could have adapted to survive in Venus's current acidic cloud layers remains a topic of speculation, but the loss of its oceans would have marked a critical turning point in its habitability. Geological evidence of a habitable past. One of the most intriguing regions of Venus is the tesserae, vast areas of rugged, highly deformed terrain that stand out from the smoother volcanic plains surrounding them. Tesserae are characterized by intersecting ridges and valleys, forming a complex pattern that suggests a history of intense tectonic activity. These regions are thought to be some of the oldest parts of Venus's surface, potentially dating back billions of years. Their age makes them a key focus for scientists looking to understand the planet's early history, including whether water might have played a role in shaping their formation. On Earth, similar geological features are often associated with the presence of water. For example, tectonic plate interactions and the folding of crustal material can be influenced by the lubricating effect of water within the planet's crust. If water once existed on Venus, it might have contributed to the formation of the tesserae by facilitating the movement and deformation of its surface layers. This possibility makes the tesserae a critical area of interest for future exploration, as analyzing their composition could provide direct evidence of water-related processes. The vast plains of Venus, dominated by ancient lava flows, cover much of the planet's surface, created by widespread volcanic activity that likely occurred over hundreds of millions of years. On Earth, lava flows often interact with water, either erupting under the sea or flowing across wet landscapes, leaving behind telltale signs such as pillow lavas or hydrothermally altered rocks. While Venus's surface is too hot for water today, examining the chemical composition of its lava flows might reveal whether water was present during their formation. The planet's extreme surface conditions, with temperatures hot enough to melt lead and atmospheric pressures comparable to being 900 meters underwater, make direct exploration difficult. Most of what scientists know about Venus's surface comes from radar mapping and data collected by orbiting spacecraft. The Soviet Union's Venera missions, which landed on Venus in the 1970s and 1980s, provided brief glimpses of its surface before succumbing to the harsh environment. These missions confirmed the rocky nature of Venus's surface and hinted at its volcanic and tectonic history. Unlike Earth, where erosion and tectonic activity often obscure craters, Venus's surface preserves them relatively well due to the lack of water. The distribution and condition of these craters suggest that Venus underwent a major resurfacing event around 500 million years ago, during which much of its older crust was buried under new volcanic material. This resurfacing event likely erased many earlier features, making it more challenging to find direct evidence of a habitable past. Maxwell Montes, the tallest mountain range on Venus, rises over 11 kilometers above the surrounding plains, surpassing even Mount Everest in height. The formation of such massive features likely involved processes similar to those that create mountains on Earth, such as crustal compression and uplift. On Earth, these processes are often influenced by the presence of water within the crust, which helps rocks deform and slide past each other. If water once existed on Venus, it might have played a role in shaping its mountainous terrain, just as it does on Earth. Shield volcanoes and volcanic domes further hint at the planet's active past. These structures are strikingly similar to those found on Earth and other rocky planets, suggesting that Venus's interior was once as dynamic as its surface. Some of Venus's volcanoes appear relatively young, indicating that volcanic activity might still be ongoing in certain areas. On Earth, volcanoes often interact with water, creating explosive eruptions or hydrothermal systems that can support unique ecosystems. While Venus's current conditions make such interactions impossible, its ancient volcanoes might hold evidence of a time when water and volcanic activity coexisted. The greenhouse catastrophe: how Venus became an inferno. The story of Venus's transformation begins with its atmosphere. Today, Venus's atmosphere is composed of about 96% carbon dioxide, with traces of nitrogen and other gases. Carbon dioxide is a potent greenhouse gas, trapping heat from the sun and preventing it from escaping back into space. On Earth, a similar effect helps maintain temperatures that support life. But on Venus, this process spiraled out of control. The accumulation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere created a feedback loop, driving temperatures higher and higher until the planet became unrecognizable. One of the key factors that contributed to this runaway effect was Venus's proximity to the Sun. The extra heat likely caused any early water on Venus's surface to evaporate, filling the atmosphere with water vapor. Like carbon dioxide, water vapor is a greenhouse gas, and its presence in the atmosphere would have amplified the warming effect. As temperatures continued to rise, more water would have evaporated, intensifying the greenhouse effect in a cycle that fed on itself. Without water to absorb carbon dioxide and form stable compounds like carbonates, the gas accumulated in the atmosphere unchecked. On Earth, processes like weathering and the formation of sedimentary rocks help regulate carbon dioxide levels by locking it away in the crust. Venus, however, lacked these stabilizing mechanisms once its water was gone. The planet's volcanic activity likely added to the problem, releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere over millions of years. The intense sunlight at Venus's distance from the Sun caused water molecules in the atmosphere to break apart, a process known as photodissociation. The lighter hydrogen atoms escaped into space, while the heavier oxygen atoms reacted with other elements in the atmosphere or surface. Over time, this process stripped Venus of its water, leaving behind a dry, carbon dioxide-dominated atmosphere that trapped even more heat. The thick, reflective sulfuric acid clouds trap heat in the lower atmosphere while also blocking much of the sunlight from reaching the surface. They contribute to the greenhouse effect by insulating the planet, ensuring that the heat remains trapped and temperatures stay high. The origin of these clouds is tied to volcanic activity, which releases sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. This gas reacts with water vapor to form the sulfuric acid that makes up the clouds, creating a toxic environment that extends high above the planet's surface. The planet is dotted with thousands of volcanoes, some of which may still be active today. Volcanic eruptions release large amounts of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, gases that fuel the greenhouse effect. The lack of tectonic plate movement on Venus means that heat from the planet's interior builds up over time, leading to periodic episodes of massive volcanic activity. These episodes, known as resurfacing events, have likely contributed to the thick atmosphere and extreme climate we see today. Was there ever a biosphere? Exploring ancient microbial life. If liquid water existed on Venus's surface for hundreds of millions of years, it opens the door to the possibility of a biosphere, an environment capable of sustaining life, at least in microbial form. Exploring this idea requires piecing together clues from Venus's geological and atmospheric history, as well as drawing comparisons to Earth's early microbial ecosystems. On Earth, life emerged relatively quickly after the planet stabilized. Microbial life forms, particularly extremophiles, have proven capable of thriving in environments that range from boiling hot springs to the crushing depths of the ocean. If early Venus had similar conditions, liquid water, a moderate climate, and volcanic activity providing energy, it might have been a suitable habitat for microbes. These hypothetical organisms would have needed to adapt to the planet's evolving conditions, especially as the climate began to shift dramatically. Venus's ancient oceans would have provided the medium necessary for chemical reactions that form the building blocks of life. On Earth, such reactions are thought to have taken place in hydrothermal vents, shallow pools, or even under the protective cover of ice. If similar environments existed on Venus, they might have served as cradles for microbial ecosystems. Unlike Earth, where the fossil record provides a detailed history of life, Venus's surface has been reshaped repeatedly by volcanic activity, erasing any potential traces of ancient organisms. Even if microbial life did exist, finding physical evidence on the surface today would be incredibly difficult. However, indirect evidence could still exist, particularly in the planet's atmosphere. Venus's thick clouds, composed primarily of sulfuric acid, contain trace amounts of other gases that could hold clues to its past. Some scientists have speculated that the presence of certain chemical compounds, such as phosphine, might indicate biological activity. Phosphine is a gas that, on Earth, is associated with microbial processes. In 2020, a study reported the possible detection of phosphine in Venus's atmosphere, sparking widespread debate. While later analyses questioned these findings, the discussion highlighted the potential for the atmosphere to act as a repository of ancient biosignatures. The transition from a temperate world to the runaway greenhouse conditions we see today would have been catastrophic for any biosphere. Rising temperatures, the loss of liquid water, and the thickening of the atmosphere would have created an environment that was increasingly inhospitable. Microbes that survived in water would have been the first to face extinction, while any airborne organisms might have found temporary refuge in the upper atmosphere, where temperatures are cooler. Even today, the idea of microbial life persisting in Venus's clouds has not been entirely ruled out, though it remains speculative. If Venus, Earth, and Mars all started with similar conditions, why did only Earth develop and sustain a thriving biosphere? This question touches on the broader topic of planetary habitability and the fine balance of factors required to support life. Understanding why Venus's climate became so extreme could help scientists identify the warning signs of climate instability on other planets, both in our solar system and beyond. Future missions to Venus could provide more definitive answers about its potential for ancient life. Spacecraft equipped with advanced instruments could analyze the planet's surface and atmosphere for chemical signatures that might hint at past or present biology. Samples returned to Earth for detailed study could reveal isotopic ratios or molecular structures that are difficult to explain through non-biological processes. Such discoveries would be groundbreaking, shedding light on one of the most profound questions in science: whether life exists or has ever existed beyond Earth. A Tale of Two Worlds: Why Venus and Earth Took Divergent Paths. While Earth thrives with an abundance of life, oceans, and a temperate climate, Venus has become a searing wasteland cloaked in thick, toxic clouds. Understanding why these two planets diverged so dramatically is a key question in planetary science. Earth's magnetic field creates a protective shield that deflects harmful solar wind and cosmic radiation. Venus lacks a global magnetic field. The reasons for this are not fully understood, but may be linked to differences in core dynamics. Without this protective shield, Venus's atmosphere has been directly exposed to the Sun's relentless radiation, which has likely contributed to the loss of water and lighter atmospheric components. Early in their histories, both planets likely had similar amounts of water. On Earth, this water condensed into oceans, forming a stable reservoir that interacted with the atmosphere and surface to regulate the planet's climate. On Venus, the water evaporated into the atmosphere, water vapor intensified the warming effect, creating a feedback loop that led to even more evaporation. The Sun's ultraviolet radiation then broke apart water molecules in Venus's upper atmosphere, allowing hydrogen atoms to escape into space. This photodissociation left Venus dry and devoid of the liquid water that might have tempered its climate. On Earth, the movement of tectonic plates drives processes like subduction, where oceanic crust is pushed into the mantle, recycling carbon and other elements. This cycling of materials helps regulate the planet's carbon dioxide levels and, by extension, its climate. Venus, with its stagnant crust, lacks this form of plate tectonics. Heat from the planet's interior builds up over time, eventually causing catastrophic resurfacing events that release vast amounts of gases into the atmosphere all at once. This episodic release of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases likely contributed to Venus's extreme climate, as there were no gradual processes to counterbalance these effects. Venus's atmosphere is nearly 100 times thicker than Earth's, composed primarily of carbon dioxide, with clouds of sulfuric acid that trap heat and create surface conditions hotter than those on Mercury. Earth's atmosphere, by contrast, is a delicate balance of nitrogen, oxygen, and trace gases that support life. This balance is maintained by interactions between the atmosphere, oceans, and biosphere, processes that are absent on Venus. Life on Earth has had a profound impact on the planet's climate and atmospheric composition, from the production of oxygen by photosynthetic organisms to the storage of carbon in biomass and sediments. Venus, with its extreme conditions, has no such biosphere to moderate its climate. The absence of life on Venus is both a consequence of its harsh environment and a factor that perpetuates its inhospitable conditions. The interplay between these factors highlights the complexity of planetary evolution. Small differences in initial conditions, such as distance from the Sun, appear to have been amplified over time, leading to the stark contrast we see today. While Earth and Venus started as near twins, the paths they took diverged early in their histories, shaped by a combination of internal and external forces. Floating microbes: the possibility of life in Venus's upper atmosphere. While the planet's surface is a fiery, uninhabitable wasteland, conditions in Venus's cloud layers high above are surprisingly different. At altitudes between 48 and 60 kilometers, temperatures range from about 30 to 70 degrees Celsius, and the pressure is comparable to what we experience at sea level on Earth. These conditions have led some researchers to speculate that Venus's upper atmosphere might harbor microbial life, despite the extreme acidity of the environment. The hypothesis rests on the possibility that certain types of microbes could survive and even thrive in the cooler cloud layers. These hypothetical organisms would need to be highly specialized to tolerate the extreme acidity caused by sulfuric acid droplets, which dominate the atmosphere at these heights. On Earth, we know of microorganisms that live in conditions previously thought to be inhospitable. Acidophiles, for example, can survive in highly acidic environments, such as volcanic springs and industrial waste pools. These organisms use chemical energy rather than sunlight to sustain themselves, suggesting that life could adapt to the harsh conditions found on Venus. One potential energy source for microbes in Venus's clouds is sulfur dioxide, a gas abundant in the atmosphere. On Earth, some microorganisms can metabolize sulfur compounds, deriving energy from chemical reactions involving sulfur dioxide and other sulfur-containing molecules. If similar processes are possible on Venus, microbes could feed on sulfur dioxide while producing byproducts such as hydrogen sulfide or sulfur particles. These byproducts could potentially explain some of the unusual chemical signatures observed in Venus's atmosphere. The dark patches seen in ultraviolet images of Venus have also fueled speculation about microbial life. These patches absorb ultraviolet light, giving them a unique spectral signature that scientists have struggled to explain. Some researchers have proposed that these UV absorbers could be organic in nature, possibly composed of suspended microbial colonies. The idea is not completely far-fetched, as microorganisms on Earth have evolved pigments to protect themselves from harmful UV radiation. On Venus, similar adaptations could allow microbes to survive in the high-altitude clouds, where UV radiation from the sun is intense. On Earth, phosphine is primarily associated with biological processes, such as the breakdown of organic matter in anaerobic environments. The discovery of phosphine on Venus sparked intense debate. However, the detection remains controversial, and alternative explanations, such as unknown chemical or geological processes, are still being explored. The acidic environment in Venus's clouds is far more extreme than any conditions known to support life on Earth. Sulfuric acid not only disrupts biological membranes, but also dehydrates organic molecules, making it incredibly difficult for cells to maintain their integrity. To survive, microbes would need to develop extraordinary mechanisms to shield themselves from the acid. One possibility is that they could form protective coatings or capsules, similar to the way some Earth microbes encase themselves in biofilms, or spore-like structures to endure harsh conditions. Another obstacle is the scarcity of water in Venus's atmosphere. Water is a fundamental ingredient for life as we understand it, and Venus's clouds contain only trace amounts. Some researchers have proposed that microbes could extract water directly from the sulfuric acid droplets using specialized biochemical pathways. This idea is supported by the existence of certain Earth microbes that can draw moisture from seemingly dry environments. If life on Venus evolved in a similar way, it could potentially overcome the water scarcity in the atmosphere. Current and future missions to Venus are designed to probe the atmosphere in greater detail, searching for signs of life or its chemical precursors. Balloons, probes, and orbiters equipped with advanced instruments could sample the cloud layers, analyzing their composition and looking for complex organic molecules. These missions could also help determine whether the UV absorbers or phosphine are indeed linked to biological processes. One mission concept, known as the Venus Life Finder, aims to collect and analyze samples from the upper atmosphere using small, lightweight probes. These probes would be capable of detecting organic molecules, isotopic ratios, and other potential biosignatures. Such missions could provide groundbreaking insights into the possibility of life beyond Earth. If microbes are found in the planet's clouds, it would challenge our understanding of where life can exist and how it evolves. It would suggest that life can adapt to environments vastly different from those on Earth, expanding the scope of astrobiology to include worlds once thought to be entirely hostile. Even if life is not discovered, studying Venus's atmosphere could reveal how planets develop conditions that are either favorable or hostile to life. By comparing Venus to Earth, scientists can gain a better understanding of the factors that influence planetary habitability, including atmospheric chemistry, volcanic activity, and interactions with solar radiation. These insights could inform the search for life on other planets and moons, such as Mars, Europa, or Titan. Venus's magnetic field, a key to retaining or losing life. Venus, like Earth, is similar in size and composition, yet it lacks one crucial feature that has been essential for the survival of life on our planet: a strong magnetic field. A magnetic field acts as a protective shield, guarding a planet's atmosphere from the relentless bombardment of solar wind and cosmic radiation. Without it, the atmosphere can slowly erode, losing critical elements that could otherwise sustain life. For Venus, the absence of a significant magnetic field likely played a key role in shaping its current state, leaving it a dry, inhospitable world. Earth's magnetic field is generated by its core, where liquid iron and nickel circulate in a process called the geodynamo. This creates a magnetic shield that extends far into space, deflecting charged particles from the solar wind. Venus, despite having a core similar to Earth's, does not produce the same magnetic protection. The reasons for this are not entirely clear, but scientists suspect that Venus's core may have cooled differently, or perhaps the planet lacks the necessary rotational speed to sustain a geodynamo. Venus rotates extremely slowly, taking 243 Earth days to complete one rotation, which may not provide the dynamism needed to generate a strong magnetic field. The consequences of this missing shield have been dramatic. Solar wind, over billions of years, has stripped away lighter molecules. Observations by missions like the European Space Agency's Venus Express have revealed a tail of atmospheric particles streaming away from the planet, a direct result of solar wind erosion. This process, while slow on a human timescale, can have a profound impact over geological epochs, gradually depleting a planet's reserves of water and other volatile compounds. In the early history of the solar system, when Venus might have had liquid water and a more temperate climate, the lack of a magnetic field would have left its atmosphere vulnerable. As the sun's energy output increased over time, ultraviolet radiation would have broken apart water molecules in Venus's atmosphere into hydrogen and oxygen. The lighter hydrogen atoms, no longer bound by gravity alone, would have been swept away by the solar wind. This process, known as atmospheric escape, could have significantly contributed to the loss of Venus's water. Earth, by contrast, retained its water largely because of its magnetic field. While some atmospheric escape occurs even with a magnetic shield, the rate is much slower. Earth's magnetosphere deflects much of the solar wind, preventing it from directly interacting with the upper atmosphere. This has allowed Earth to maintain a thick, stable atmosphere over billions of years, supporting a diverse biosphere. The absence of a magnetic field on Venus also means that its atmosphere has been exposed to high levels of radiation. This radiation can break apart molecules and create a harsh environment that is less conducive to life. On Earth, the magnetic field and ozone layer work together to protect the surface from harmful ultraviolet rays, enabling life to thrive. Without similar protection, any life that might have existed on Venus would have faced extreme challenges as the planet's atmosphere evolved. Without a protective shield, the loss of water from the atmosphere may have accelerated the buildup of carbon dioxide, contributing to the runaway greenhouse effect that now dominates the planet. The interaction between atmospheric loss and greenhouse warming likely created a feedback loop, driving the planet further into its current state. Magnetic fields are not always considered when evaluating the potential for life on exoplanets, but Venus's history suggests they may be critical. A planet in the habitable zone of its star, with liquid water and a stable atmosphere, could still lose these advantages if it lacks magnetic protection. Understanding how magnetic fields form and persist is an important part of assessing a planet's ability to support life. While Venus's magnetic field is weak, it is not entirely absent. The planet has what is known as an induced magnetosphere, created by the interaction of solar wind with its ionosphere. This induced field provides some protection, but it is far less effective than Earth's intrinsic magnetic field. It cannot prevent the long-term erosion of the atmosphere, nor can it shield the surface from high-energy radiation. By studying the composition of Venus's core and its thermal state, scientists could gain a better understanding of why the geodynamo process failed. Instruments capable of measuring the current rate of atmospheric escape could also provide clues about how quickly Venus lost its water and other volatiles. These findings would not only shed light on Venus's past, but also help refine models of planetary evolution and habitability. Ancient rivers and lakes. A closer look at Venus's surface. Features. Venus's surface is dotted with vast plains, towering mountains, and sprawling valleys. But among these features are intriguing formations that resemble channels and networks of winding paths. These features, some stretching for hundreds or even thousands of kilometers, have led scientists to speculate whether Venus might once have had rivers or lakes. The channels on Venus are some of the longest and most complex in the solar system. Known as canali, these structures are often sinuous, branching and meandering, resembling river systems on Earth. Some channels terminate in what appear to be fan-like deposits, reminiscent of river deltas. One of the most striking examples is Baltis Vallis, a channel that stretches over 6,800 kilometers, making it longer than the Nile River. The sheer size and intricacy of this feature have sparked debates about its origin. On Earth, a channel of this scale would almost certainly be carved by flowing water. However, Venus's extreme surface temperatures and thick atmosphere suggest that water could not exist in liquid form today. This discrepancy has led scientists to explore alternative explanations. Venus's volcanic activity is well documented, and the planet's surface is covered with vast lava plains. Lava, particularly if it is low in viscosity, can behave in ways similar to water, carving channels as it flows across the landscape. The high temperatures on Venus would have allowed lava to remain molten for extended periods, enabling it to create the long, winding paths observed in these channels. The absence of any direct evidence for liquid water on Venus today lends support to this idea. Despite the compelling case for volcanic origins, some scientists remain open to the possibility that liquid water once played a role in shaping Venus's surface. Early in its history, Venus may have had a more temperate climate, with conditions that allowed water to exist as a liquid. If this was the case, the channels and valleys could be relics of a time when rivers and lakes dotted the planet's surface. This idea aligns with models suggesting that Venus might have had liquid water for hundreds of millions of years before the runaway greenhouse effect took hold. Certain depressions and basins on the planet's surface bear similarities to lake beds on Earth. These features, often surrounded by raised rims, suggest that liquid may have once pooled in these areas. If Venus had lakes, they would have been key players in its climate system, interacting with the atmosphere and potentially supporting chemical processes that are now lost to time. Over billions of years, these lake beds would have dried out and been buried beneath layers of volcanic material, erasing much of the evidence of their existence. To investigate these questions, scientists rely on radar data collected by missions like NASA's Magellan spacecraft, which mapped Venus's surface in the early 1990s. The radar images reveal fine details of the planet's topography, allowing researchers to study the shapes and patterns of its surface features. While these data have provided valuable insights, they also leave room for interpretation, as the processes that shaped Venus's surface remain poorly understood. If remnants of ancient sediments or minerals associated with water are detected, it would strengthen the case for a watery past. Landers equipped with instruments to analyze the surface could directly sample materials from these regions, providing definitive evidence of their origins. Sulfuric acid and strange chemistry, the Venusian atmosphere today. Sulfuric acid forms in Venus's atmosphere through a process involving sulfur dioxide and water vapor, both of which are abundant at higher altitudes. The sun's ultraviolet radiation breaks apart molecules of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide, releasing oxygen atoms. These oxygen atoms combine with sulfur dioxide to form sulfur trioxide, which then reacts with water vapor to create sulfuric acid. This acid condenses into droplets, forming the thick clouds that shroud the planet. At altitudes of about 50 to 70 kilometers, where the clouds are most prominent, the atmosphere is nearly saturated with sulfuric acid droplets. This region, often referred to as the cloud deck, is where the planet's weather takes place. Winds at these altitudes reach speeds of over 300 kilometers per hour, whipping the acidic clouds around the planet in just a few days. Below this layer, the atmosphere grows denser and hotter, creating a nearly impenetrable barrier for any spacecraft attempting to study the surface. Sulfuric acid is not just corrosive, it also disrupts biological processes. On Earth, life relies on water as a solvent for chemical reactions, but sulfuric acid behaves very differently. It dehydrates organic molecules, breaking them apart instead of supporting them. While some extremophiles on Earth can survive in acidic environments, the acidity of Venus's clouds is far beyond what any known organism can endure. The amount of water vapor in Venus's atmosphere is about 0.002%, an incredibly small fraction compared to Earth's. Without water, the chemical reactions necessary for life are severely limited. Adding to the complexity of Venus's atmosphere is the presence of unusual compounds and phenomena that are still not fully understood. For example, the clouds contain small amounts of sulfur compounds that absorb ultraviolet light. creating mysterious dark patches when viewed in certain wavelengths. These patches, often called UV absorbers, have puzzled scientists for decades. Some researchers have speculated that these compounds could include sulfur allotropes or even unknown forms of sulfur chemistry. Others have suggested that the UV absorbers might point to unusual photochemical reactions unique to Venus's environment. The extreme conditions of Venus's atmosphere make it a natural laboratory for studying chemistry under high temperatures and pressures. The lower layers of the atmosphere, closer to the surface, are so dense and hot that they mimic the conditions inside industrial reactors on Earth. This has led scientists to propose that Venus could offer insights into high-temperature chemical processes that are difficult to replicate in laboratories. For example, the interactions between carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other trace gases at these extreme conditions could reveal new pathways for chemical reactions. Venus's atmosphere is not static. It is a dynamic system shaped by both internal and external forces. Volcanic eruptions, for instance, can release large amounts of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, replenishing the supply of sulfur needed to form sulfuric acid. The sun's ultraviolet radiation drives many of the chemical reactions that occur in the upper atmosphere. Over time, these processes create a delicate balance that maintains the unique chemical composition of Venus's atmosphere. Phosphine and anomalies, unraveling recent discoveries. In 2020, scientists made a detection of phosphine gas in Venus's atmosphere. Phosphine is a molecule composed of one phosphorus atom and 3 hydrogen atoms, and on Earth it is primarily associated with biological processes. This association raised an extraordinary question. Could the presence of phosphine on Venus indicate some form of life? The announcement sparked excitement, skepticism, and a flurry of scientific debate as researchers scrambled to understand the implications of this unexpected finding. Phosphine is a molecule that, under normal circumstances, should not exist in significant quantities in the harsh environment of Venus. It is highly reactive and would break down quickly in the planet's atmosphere, which is dominated by carbon dioxide and contains very little hydrogen. For phosphine to be present, there must be a process actively producing it. On Earth, phosphine is found in environments where anaerobic microbes, organisms that do not require oxygen, are breaking down organic matter. It is also produced industrially, but such processes are obviously not at play on Venus. The detection was made using radio telescopes, specifically the James Clerk Maxwell Telescope in Hawaii and the Atacama Large Millimeter Submillimeter Array, or ALMA, in Chile. Scientists identified a spectral signature at a wavelength associated with phosphine, indicating its presence in the Venusian atmosphere at an altitude of around 50 to 60 kilometers. This region of the atmosphere, the cloud deck, is one of the few areas on Venus where conditions are relatively temperate. The discovery immediately raised questions about the source of the phosphine. If it were not produced by life, then what? Venus's environment is dominated by extreme chemistry, and some researchers suggested that unknown chemical reactions could be responsible. For example, volcanic activity, lightning, or interactions between sunlight and the atmosphere might produce phosphine through pathways not yet understood. However, extensive modeling and calculations have so far failed to identify a plausible abiotic process that could account for the observed levels of phosphine. Critics of the discovery pointed to potential issues with the data itself. The spectral signature of phosphine is faint, and interpreting such data requires careful analysis to rule out errors or misinterpretations. Some researchers suggested that the signal might be due to interference from sulfur dioxide, a common gas in Venus's atmosphere, which has spectral features that overlap with those of phosphine. Others questioned whether the signal was even real, proposing that it could be an artifact of data processing. In response to these critiques, the original research team revisited their data and performed additional analyses. They acknowledged some uncertainties but maintained that the phosphine signal could not be fully explained by sulfur dioxide or other known atmospheric components. At the same time, other teams conducted independent observations with mixed results, Some studies supported the presence of phosphine, while others failed to detect it, leaving the question unresolved. If phosphine truly exists in Venus's atmosphere, its presence could suggest the existence of a biological process in the cloud layers. Microbial life, if present, would need to be incredibly resilient to survive in an environment dominated by sulfuric acid and with only trace amounts of water. These hypothetical microbes might use chemical reactions involving sulfur compounds for energy, as some extremophiles do on Earth. Even if the phosphine is not biological in origin, its presence would still challenge our understanding of Venus's chemistry. It would indicate that there are chemical processes occurring in the atmosphere that we do not yet understand, processes that could have implications for planetary science and the study of atmospheres beyond our solar system. Understanding these processes could help refine models of planetary atmospheres and inform the search for life on exoplanets, where similar anomalies might one day be detected. The planet's thick atmosphere and extreme surface conditions make it difficult to gather data, and much of what we know comes from remote observations and brief encounters by spacecraft. To resolve the phosphine question, scientists need more detailed and direct measurements of Venus's atmosphere. Future missions, such as NASA's Da Vinci Plus and ESA's Envision, aim to provide these measurements by sending probes and orbiters equipped with advanced instruments to study the planet's composition and dynamics. In the meantime, some scientists are exploring the possibility that Venus's atmosphere might contain other unexpected molecules, which could provide additional clues about its chemistry and potential habitability. Others are developing laboratory experiments to simulate Venus-like conditions and test whether phosphine can be produced abiotically under such conditions. These efforts are not only aimed at understanding Venus, but also at expanding our knowledge of planetary science more broadly. The phosphine discovery has also reignited interest in Venus as a target for astrobiology. For decades, the search for life beyond Earth has focused primarily on Mars and the icy moons of the outer solar system, such as Europa and Enceladus. Venus, with its scorching surface and acidic atmosphere, was largely dismissed as too hostile to support life. But the possibility of microbial life in the cloud layers has forced scientists to reconsider this assumption, reminding us that life, if it exists elsewhere, might not look anything like what we are familiar with on Earth. Lessons from Earth. Microorganisms, thriving in harsh environments. Extremophiles can live in places that are acidic, boiling hot, freezing cold, or crushingly pressurized. They survive and even flourish in conditions that might seem incompatible with life, offering valuable lessons as we consider the possibility of life on other planets. In the scalding waters of hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, where temperatures can exceed 400 degrees Celsius, certain bacteria and archaea thrive. These organisms do not rely on sunlight for energy, as most life on Earth does. Instead, they use chemical reactions, such as oxidizing sulfur or hydrogen, to fuel their metabolic processes. These chemolithoautotrophs, as they are called, demonstrate that life can persist without sunlight, drawing energy directly from the chemistry of its environment. This resilience is intriguing when considering Venus's atmosphere, where sunlight is filtered through thick clouds, and sulfur compounds are abundant. In places like the Rio Tinto in Spain, a river with water so acidic it resembles battery acid, microorganisms have found a way to survive. The river's vivid red color comes from high levels of iron and the activity of acid-loving bacteria that metabolize the iron and sulfur compounds. These acidophiles are specially adapted to maintain their cellular integrity and metabolic processes in conditions that would dissolve most organic materials. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean, pressures are over 1,000 times greater than at the surface. Yet, microbial life has been found there, thriving in the dark, high-pressure environment. While Venus does not have liquid oceans, the pressures in its lower atmosphere are similarly immense. Although this is a challenging environment, these microbes have shown that life can find ways to adapt to such conditions. Deinococcus radiodurans, often called the world's toughest bacterium, can survive radiation doses thousands of times higher than what would kill a human. This resilience comes from its ability to repair DNA damage caused by radiation. On Venus, the lack of a magnetic field allows solar and cosmic radiation to penetrate the atmosphere, creating a potentially harmful environment for life. However, the possibility of microorganisms developing similar radiation resistance cannot be ruled out, especially if they inhabit the upper cloud layers, where conditions are somewhat less extreme. In harsh environments, some microorganisms enter a state of suspended animation, forming spores or cysts that can endure extreme heat, cold, dryness or radiation for years or even centuries. These dormant forms are essentially waiting out the unfavorable conditions, ready to reactivate when the environment becomes more hospitable. The Atacama Desert in Chile, one of the driest places on Earth, supports microbial life that extracts moisture from the air or uses highly efficient mechanisms to conserve water. Venus's atmosphere contains only trace amounts of water vapor, but this does not entirely preclude the possibility of life. If organisms exist there, they might employ similar strategies to make use of the scarce water available. On Earth, life has demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt, even to conditions that seem utterly alien. This adaptability suggests that if life ever arose on Venus, it might have found ways to persist in its unique and extreme environment. The acidic, sulfur-rich clouds of Venus, while hostile by Earth standards, might offer niches where life could take hold, especially in the cooler, more temperate upper layers of the atmosphere. Scientists studying extremophiles are not only interested in understanding the limits of life on Earth, but also in applying this knowledge to the search for life beyond our planet. By identifying the mechanisms that allow extremophiles to survive and thrive, researchers can better understand the kinds of adaptations that might be necessary for life to exist on Venus or other harsh environments in the solar system. On Venus, life, if it exists, would likely be very different from anything found on Earth. It might not rely on DNA or water in the same way, instead using alternative biochemistries suited to its environment. While Earth-based extremophiles provide a starting point, they also remind us that life's potential diversity might far exceed our expectations. Could Venusian clouds harbor acid-resistant life forms? On Earth, even acid-tolerant extremophiles struggle in environments as acidic as Venus's clouds. For life to exist in such conditions, it would likely need membranes or cell walls resistant to acid damage. This could involve completely novel biochemistry, with protective layers that repel or neutralize the acid. Much like some Earth-based extremophiles use specialized proteins or chemical coatings to shield themselves from harmful substances. The structure of these acid-resistant membranes could involve materials that are chemically inert or capable of rapid repair. On Earth, some extremophiles in acidic environments have evolved to produce biofilms, which act as barriers against the external environment. These films trap water and nutrients while keeping harmful acids at bay. Life in Venus's clouds might rely on a similar strategy, creating microscopic shelters within the droplets of sulfuric acid. With little water available, Venusian microbes might utilize sulfur compounds as both a source of energy and a building block for cellular processes. On Earth, sulfur-reducing bacteria are known to convert sulfur compounds into less harmful substances as part of their metabolic cycles. Life on Venus could exploit the abundance of sulfur dioxide and other sulfur compounds, perhaps using a unique chemical pathway to extract energy from these materials. Venus's thick cloud layers block much of the sunlight, especially at lower altitudes. However, in the upper atmosphere, enough light penetrates to potentially sustain photosynthetic organisms. These hypothetical life forms might use alternative pigments to capture the dim light more efficiently. Unlike the green chlorophyll found in plants, they could employ pigments tuned to the wavelengths of light that pass through Venus's clouds. Some Earth organisms, such as cyanobacteria, already exhibit such flexibility, adjusting their light-absorbing pigments based on their environment. Venus's atmosphere is exceptionally dry, with only trace amounts of water vapor. life forms would need to extract and conserve water with extreme efficiency. Venusian microbes could perhaps evolve structures or molecules that trap and retain water from the sparse vapor available. While the upper cloud layers are more temperate, life forms might still need to withstand occasional shifts to denser, hotter regions of the atmosphere. Adaptations could include mechanisms to adjust buoyancy, allowing them to remain in the cooler, habitable zones. On Earth, some marine organisms use gas-filled sacs to regulate their position in the water column. A Venusian equivalent might involve lightweight, gas-filled structures that help keep microbes suspended in the cloud layers. In Venus's clouds, microorganisms might rely on chemical signals to interact with one another, using sulfur-based compounds as a medium. This could enable colonies of organisms to share resources or coordinate survival strategies, much like biofilms do in extreme environments on Earth. Such cooperative behavior might be essential for overcoming the challenges of their environment. One possibility is that life on Venus originated when the planet's environment was more Earth-like, with liquid water and a temperate climate. Over time, as the planet underwent a runaway greenhouse effect, this life might have adapted to the changing conditions, retreating to the upper atmosphere as the surface became uninhabitable. If this is the case, Venusian microbes could represent a unique window into life's ability to endure and evolve under extreme stress. The role of UV radiation in supporting or hindering life. The sun's energy, especially in the form of ultraviolet light, bathes the planet, driving intense chemical reactions that alter its atmospheric composition. This radiation, while destructive to most known forms of life, also has the potential to create the building blocks of life or sustain unique ecosystems. The intensity of UV radiation on Venus is far greater than on Earth, primarily because Venus lacks a protective ozone layer. On Earth, the ozone layer absorbs much of the harmful UV radiation, shielding surface life from its damaging effects. Venus, however, has no such barrier. As a result, its atmosphere is exposed to high-energy radiation, particularly in the upper cloud layers. This radiation can break apart molecules, leading to the formation of reactive species like free radicals. These radicals can further interact with other atmospheric components, creating complex chemical pathways. For life to survive under these conditions, it would need to develop strategies to protect itself from UV damage. On Earth, some microorganisms have evolved mechanisms to cope with UV exposure. For example, certain bacteria and archaea produce pigments like carotenoids or melanin, which act as natural sunscreens, absorbing harmful radiation and preventing it from damaging their DNA. If life exists in Venus's atmosphere, it might use similar strategies, evolving UV-resistant pigments that shield cells from radiation while allowing other wavelengths of light to be used for energy. Another possible adaptation could involve the repair of UV-induced damage. On Earth, organisms exposed to high levels of UV radiation often have efficient DNA repair systems. These systems identify and fix the damage caused by radiation, allowing cells to recover and continue functioning. Venusian life would likely need robust repair mechanisms to cope with the constant bombardment of UV radiation. Such systems might be even more advanced than those found on Earth, given the harsher conditions. However, high-energy radiation can also drive chemical reactions that produce organic molecules, the building blocks of life. In Venus's atmosphere, UV light interacts with carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other gases, leading to the formation of complex sulfur and carbon compounds. Some of these compounds, such as sulfuric acid, are destructive to life. However, others could provide the raw materials for life to develop or sustain itself. UV radiation can create hydrogen sulfide and other sulfur compounds that might serve as energy sources for hypothetical Venusian microbes. It also influences the planet's albedo, or reflectivity. The thick clouds of Venus reflect a significant portion of sunlight, making the planet one of the brightest objects in the night sky. This reflectivity is due in part to the interaction of UV radiation with the sulfuric acid droplets in the clouds. These interactions create a hazy, reflective layer that obscures the planet's surface and contributes to its extreme climate. The high albedo reduces the amount of solar energy reaching the lower cloud layers, creating a more stable environment where temperatures and radiation levels are less extreme. This region, often referred to as the habitable zone of Venus's atmosphere, is where scientists believe life would most likely exist, if it exists at all. In its early days, when Venus may have had liquid water and a more Earth-like climate, UV radiation could have driven prebiotic chemistry, creating the first organic molecules. Over time, as the planet's climate changed and water was lost, the role of UV radiation would have shifted, becoming a more destructive force. UV radiation could play a role in creating or breaking down phosphine, influencing its distribution and concentration. Many exoplanets orbiting other stars experience intense radiation, especially those close to their stars in the so-called habitable zones. By studying how UV radiation interacts with Venus's atmosphere and how life might adapt to these conditions, scientists can gain insights into the potential for life on other planets with harsh environments. The role of plate tectonics in planetary habitability. Plate tectonics are one of the key processes that regulate the planet's climate over geological timescales, helping maintain conditions suitable for life. Venus, despite its similarities to Earth in size and composition, appears to lack this crucial mechanism. On Earth, the lithosphere, the rigid outer shell of the planet, is broken into large plates that float on the semi-fluid mantle beneath. These plates interact at their boundaries, colliding, pulling apart, or sliding past each other. These movements are driven by the heat from Earth's interior, which creates convection currents in the mantle. This dynamic system not only sculpts the surface, but also facilitates the long-term carbon cycle, a critical process for regulating the planet's climate. When tectonic plates subduct, one sliding beneath another, carbon-rich sediments are carried into the mantle. Some of this carbon is released back into the atmosphere through volcanic eruptions, while the rest remains trapped within the Earth's interior. This recycling of carbon acts as a natural thermostat, helping to stabilize global temperatures over millions of years. Without this mechanism, Earth's climate might have spiraled out of control, becoming too hot or too cold. Venus, in contrast, shows no clear evidence of plate tectonics. Its surface is a single, unbroken shell with features that suggest episodic, planet-wide resurfacing events rather than the continuous recycling seen on Earth. This difference likely stems from the planet's extreme heat and lack of water. Water is essential for lubricating the movement of tectonic plates, reducing friction, and allowing them to slide over the mantle. On Earth, water infiltrates the crust through cracks and subduction zones, facilitating plate motion. Without sufficient water, the lithosphere becomes rigid and immobile, as seems to be the case on Venus. Without the subduction of carbon-bearing materials into the mantle, there is no mechanism to sequester carbon dioxide over long periods. Instead, volcanic activity on Venus has likely released vast amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere, where it has accumulated unchecked. This process, combined with the planet's proximity to the Sun, has fueled the runaway greenhouse effect that makes Venus the hottest planet in the solar system today. On Earth, tectonic activity helps release heat from the interior through mid-ocean ridges and volcanic eruptions. Venus, lacking this steady release, may experience a buildup of internal heat that leads to catastrophic resurfacing events. These events, where massive outpourings of lava cover the planet's surface, could reset its geology in a relatively short time. The most recent resurfacing on Venus is thought to have occurred hundreds of millions of years ago, erasing much of its earlier history. Despite the lack of active plate tectonics, Venus does exhibit features that hint at localized tectonic-like processes. Its surface is marked by extensive fault lines, rift zones, and deformed tesserae regions. These areas suggest that the lithosphere has fractured and shifted in response to stresses from the planet's interior. However, these movements appear to be isolated and unconnected, lacking the global network of interacting plates seen on Earth. The stagnant lid tectonics of Venus contrasts sharply with Earth's dynamic system. Stagnant lid refers to a planetary crust that remains largely immobile, with heat escaping primarily through conduction rather than the movement of plates. This type of tectonics is less efficient at regulating heat and recycling materials, which could explain why Venus's surface appears so geologically young despite its old age. The stagnant lid model may also help scientists understand the geological histories of other planets and moons, such as Mars and Europa, which show limited or no evidence of active plate tectonics. Studying the differences between Earth and Venus highlights the importance of water, not just as a solvent for life, but also as a lubricant for geological processes. Venus's dry, desiccated state serves as a stark reminder of how crucial water is to the stability of a planet's environment. While Earth's plate tectonics have played a key role in maintaining its climate and fostering life, it is not yet clear whether this process is a requirement for habitability. Exoplanets with stagnant lids or other tectonic systems may still develop conditions suitable for life, depending on their atmospheres, water content, and other factors. Some researchers speculate that Venus could have had a brief period of tectonic activity during its youth, when it retained more water and its interior was cooler. If true, this period might have contributed to a more Earth-like climate, potentially supporting liquid water and even life. However, as the planet's water was lost to space and its surface became hotter and more rigid, this tectonic activity would have ceased, locking Venus into its current state. Understanding why Venus lacks plate tectonics could also help refine models of planetary evolution. It suggests that tectonic activity is not an inevitable outcome for rocky planets, even those similar in size and composition to Earth. Instead, it depends on a delicate balance of factors, including temperature, water availability, and internal heat flow. A different kind of life. Could life evolve without water? When we think of life, we often picture it as it exists on Earth, with water as its defining ingredient. Water is fundamental to all known life forms, acting as a solvent where essential biochemical reactions take place. Its unique properties, such as its ability to dissolve a wide range of substances and remain liquid over a broad temperature range, make it an ideal medium for life as we know it. But what if life could evolve without water? Could a completely different kind of chemistry sustain living systems in environments like the harsh, acidic clouds of Venus? Sulfuric acid is a highly corrosive liquid, capable of breaking down organic molecules that form the basis of life on our planet. Yet some scientists have begun to speculate that life could adapt to this alien environment by relying on sulfuric acid as a solvent instead of water. Sulfuric acid is a powerful oxidizer, meaning it readily donates oxygen atoms to other substances. This characteristic makes it highly reactive and capable of driving chemical processes. While such reactivity would destroy the delicate molecules that sustain life on Earth, it could also provide the energy needed for entirely different kinds of biochemical reactions. In this way, sulfuric acid might play a role similar to that of water in supporting life. One of the key challenges for life in a sulfuric acid environment would be the stability of its molecular building blocks. Organic molecules, such as proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids, are highly sensitive to acidic conditions. They would quickly degrade in the presence of concentrated sulfuric acid. However, it is possible to imagine alternative biochemistries that use more robust molecules. For example, life on Venus could be based on silicon instead of carbon, as silicon forms bonds that are more resistant to breakdown in harsh environments. Alternatively, Venusian life could rely on entirely new types of molecules that we have not yet discovered or synthesized. On Earth, cell membranes made of lipids protect the interior of cells from the external environment while allowing the exchange of nutrients and waste. In the sulfuric acid clouds of Venus, these membranes would not survive. Instead, hypothetical Venusian life forms might use membranes made of inorganic compounds, such as silica or sulfur-based materials, which are more resistant to acidic corrosion. These membranes could still perform the essential functions of separating the internal and external environments of a cell. On Earth, most life relies on water as a medium for transporting nutrients and waste, and as a participant in many metabolic reactions. In a sulfuric acid-based system, entirely new metabolic pathways would be required. For example, instead of using oxygen and organic carbon as energy sources, Venusian life might use sulfur compounds. Sulfuric acid itself could act as both a solvent and a source of energy, driving chemical reactions that sustain life. In the cooler, more stable regions of Venus's upper atmosphere, sulfuric acid droplets could serve as tiny habitats for microscopic life. These droplets might provide the necessary conditions for chemical reactions, including a source of sulfur compounds that could fuel metabolism. Traditionally, the search for life beyond Earth has focused on finding planets with liquid water. This approach is based on the assumption that all life requires water, as it does on Earth. However, if life can evolve in sulfuric acid or other alternative solvents, then the range of potentially habitable worlds expands dramatically. For example, planets or moons with dense atmospheres and unusual chemical compositions, such as Titan, or even exoplanets with high sulfur content, might be viable candidates for hosting life. This shift in perspective could influence the design of future missions, encouraging scientists to look beyond Earth-like conditions and explore more exotic environments. On Earth, life is incredibly diverse, but it is all based on the same fundamental chemistry. If life can exist in sulfuric acid, it suggests that the universe could be home to an even greater variety of life forms than we can currently imagine. These life forms might not resemble anything we recognize as living, yet they would still fulfill the basic criteria of consuming energy, growing, and reproducing. Chemosynthesis on Venus, a plausible pathway. In the search for life beyond Earth, much of the focus has been on environments that receive sunlight as an energy source. Photosynthesis, the process that converts sunlight into chemical energy, powers nearly all ecosystems on Earth. However, not all life depends on sunlight. Deep within Earth's oceans, in the complete absence of sunlight, ecosystems thrive around hydrothermal vents. These ecosystems rely on chemosynthesis, a process where organisms derive energy from chemical reactions, often involving sulfur or methane. Venus's thick atmosphere is rich in chemical compounds that could serve as potential energy sources for chemosynthetic life. The atmosphere is primarily composed of carbon dioxide, but it also contains sulfur dioxide, sulfuric acid, and trace amounts of water vapor. These compounds create a highly reactive environment where chemical reactions are constantly occurring. For hypothetical microorganisms floating in Venus's cooler cloud layers, this reactive atmosphere could provide the ingredients needed to sustain life. On Earth, chemosynthetic organisms are often found in extreme environments, such as hydrothermal vents, cold seeps, or sulfur-rich hot springs. These organisms use inorganic compounds like hydrogen sulfide or methane as energy sources. In the case of Venus, the abundance of sulfur compounds in the atmosphere could make sulfur-based chemosynthesis a plausible metabolic pathway. Microbes might oxidize sulfur dioxide into sulfuric acid, a reaction that releases energy. Alternatively, they could reduce sulfur compounds to elemental sulfur or hydrogen sulfide, depending on the availability of reactants. Venus's atmosphere contains a mysterious unknown absorber that strongly absorbs ultraviolet light in the upper cloud layers. Scientists have speculated that this absorber could be a form of life or an unusual chemical compound. If it is life, these microorganisms might use the energy from UV light to drive chemical reactions, similar to how some Earth-based microbes use sunlight. However, rather than relying solely on light, they could also tap into the chemical energy stored in the atmosphere's sulfur compounds. Earth-based chemosynthetic organisms, such as those found near hydrothermal vents, already thrive in high-pressure and high-temperature conditions, but they still operate within environments that are much less acidic than Venus's clouds. For life to survive in Venus's sulfuric acid clouds, it would need highly resistant cellular structures and biochemical pathways that can function in such an environment. Acid-resistant membranes or specialized proteins that maintain stability in acidic conditions might be necessary adaptations. On Earth, chemosynthetic ecosystems often rely on a continuous supply of inorganic compounds from geological processes. On Venus, the supply of chemical energy would come from atmospheric processes. Volcanic activity on Venus, if still active, could contribute sulfur dioxide and other compounds to the atmosphere, replenishing the chemical energy available for chemosynthesis. This would create a dynamic system where life could persist as long as the atmospheric chemistry remains stable. Certain bacteria and archaea in acidic hot springs oxidize sulfur compounds to gain energy. These microorganisms thrive in environments with pH levels as low as 1, comparable to the acidity of Venus's clouds. They have evolved enzymes and cellular mechanisms that allow them to function in such extreme conditions, providing a model for how life might adapt to Venus's atmosphere. If life can rely on chemical energy rather than sunlight, it expands the range of potentially habitable environments. Planets and moons with thick atmospheres, such as Titan, could host chemosynthetic ecosystems, even in the absence of sunlight. Venus, with its extreme conditions, represents a frontier for exploring the limits of life's adaptability. The ancient civilization hypothesis. Could Venusian life have left a trace? Venus, with its scorching surface temperatures and crushing atmospheric pressure, seems an unlikely place for life today. However, evidence suggests that it may not always have been this way. Studies indicate that Venus might have had a temperate climate for up to 2 billion years in its past. If life began during this window, and if evolutionary pressures favored complexity, could intelligent life have arisen? Supporters of the ancient civilization hypothesis point to surface features on Venus as potential evidence. Radar images from missions like Magellan have revealed vast plains, mountainous regions, and unusual structures that defy easy explanation. Some of these features, such as tesserae, are unique to Venus. While most scientists interpret these formations as products of geological processes, others have speculated that they could be remnants of ancient infrastructure, perhaps the ruins of cities or transportation networks. The lack of erosion on Venus's surface, due to the absence of water and the planet's slow surface renewal, means that if any structures were built long ago, they might still be preserved in some form. While mainstream explanations lean toward unknown chemical or geological processes, proponents of the ancient civilization hypothesis argue that the detection of phosphine in Venus's atmosphere could hint at remnants of advanced technology or industrial processes. If an ancient civilization on Venus had reached a high level of technological sophistication, it might have altered the planet's atmosphere in ways still detectable today. At altitudes between 50 and 60 kilometers, the clouds of Venus offer conditions that are relatively mild compared to the planet's surface. If life persists there today, it could represent the descendants of ancient Venusian organisms. The possibility of intelligent life, however, raises questions about whether advanced beings could have transitioned to such a habitat as surface conditions deteriorated, or whether they left behind any technological markers. In the absence of direct evidence, some theorists have turned to indirect methods, such as comparing Venus to Earth and Mars. Both of these planets show signs of ancient habitability. Mars, with its dried riverbeds and evidence of past lakes, offers a stark reminder that planetary environments can change dramatically over time. Earth, with its tectonic activity and climate regulation, demonstrates the resilience of a biosphere under the right conditions. Venus, as Earth's closest planetary neighbor and twin in size, invites similar comparisons. If Mars could once support microbial life and Earth supports complex ecosystems, could Venus have followed its own path to intelligence before succumbing to its runaway greenhouse effect? On Earth, human activity has dramatically altered the environment in a relatively short span of geological time. If a similar trajectory occurred on Venus, it raises the possibility that intelligent beings there may have contributed to their planet's inhospitable state. This line of thought aligns with cautionary tales about the fragility of ecosystems and the consequences of unchecked industrial activity. If ancient Venusian civilizations did exist, their story might serve as a stark warning about the long-term impact of human actions on Earth. skeptics of the ancient civilization hypothesis point to the lack of direct evidence as a critical flaw. Most features on Venus can be explained through known geological processes such as volcanic activity and crustal deformation. The high levels of volcanic resurfacing on Venus mean that much of the planet's history is obscured. If civilizations did exist, any surface evidence may have been buried under layers of lava or destroyed by the intense heat and pressure. Furthermore, the hostile conditions on Venus today make it unlikely that complex technology or organic material would survive intact. Despite these challenges, the hypothesis continues to capture the imagination. It invites a rethinking of what signs of past civilizations might look like on other planets. For example, rather than searching for buildings or artifacts, scientists might look for chemical signatures in the atmosphere, such as unusual isotopic ratios or concentrations of rare elements. Similarly, patterns in surface features that deviate from natural formations could hint at artificial origins. These approaches require an open mind, but remain grounded in scientific principles. Cooling the inferno. The challenges of altering Venus's atmosphere. The idea of transforming Venus into a cooler, more Earth-like planet has captured the imagination of scientists and science fiction writers for decades. Venus's extreme heat, thick atmosphere, and clouds of sulfuric acid present enormous challenges. But some researchers have explored potential methods to alter these conditions. The goal would be to reduce the greenhouse effect, lower the surface temperature, and create an environment more suitable for life, or at least for robotic exploration and study. However, the scale of such an undertaking is staggering, and each proposed method comes with significant technical and ethical challenges. One approach often discussed is thinning Venus's atmosphere. Reducing the amount of carbon dioxide could significantly lower surface temperatures, but achieving this is no small task. One possibility is to remove carbon dioxide by chemically binding it to other materials. For example, calcium or magnesium could react with carbon dioxide to form stable carbonate minerals. On Earth, this process occurs naturally over geological timescales, but replicating it on Venus would require enormous quantities of reactive materials and a way to distribute them across the planet. Another suggestion involves extracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it elsewhere. Advanced technologies, such as large-scale carbon capture and storage systems, could theoretically remove some of the gas. These systems would need to operate continuously for centuries or even millennia to make a noticeable difference, given the vast quantity of carbon dioxide in Venus's atmosphere. Moreover, the extracted gas would need to be stored safely, perhaps in underground reservoirs or in solid form as carbonates. The logistics of building and maintaining such infrastructure on Venus, with its extreme heat and corrosive conditions, make this an incredibly daunting task. Solar reflectors are another proposed method to cool Venus. By reflecting some of the sunlight away from the planet, these devices could reduce the amount of energy reaching the surface, lowering temperatures over time. These structures would need to cover a substantial portion of the planet to have a significant effect, requiring materials and engineering on an unprecedented scale. Another variation of the solar reflector idea involves deploying reflective particles or aerosols in Venus's upper atmosphere. These particles could scatter sunlight, reducing the amount of heat reaching the surface. On Earth, similar effects have been observed during volcanic eruptions, when large amounts of ash and sulfur dioxide are released into the atmosphere, temporarily cooling the planet. However, maintaining a reflective layer in Venus's atmosphere would require a continuous supply of particles, as they would eventually settle or disperse. Additionally, the introduction of reflective aerosols could have unintended consequences, such as altering atmospheric circulation or creating new chemical reactions. Terraforming Venus might also involve introducing microorganisms or engineered organisms capable of altering the atmosphere. These organisms could be genetically modified to survive in Venus's acidic clouds and high temperatures. Over time, they might help to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, although the process would again likely take thousands or perhaps even millions of years. One radical idea is to physically remove some of Venus's atmosphere by launching it into space. This concept, sometimes referred to as atmospheric mining, would involve using giant space-based structures or machines to capture and eject gas from the planet. While theoretically possible, the energy requirements for such an operation are almost incomprehensible. It would also require advanced technologies far beyond what humanity currently possesses, including massive spacecraft and propulsion systems capable of handling Venus's extreme conditions. Adding large amounts of hydrogen to the atmosphere could react with carbon dioxide to produce water and other compounds. However, transporting enough hydrogen to Venus would be a monumental challenge, requiring either the mining of hydrogen-rich resources in the solar system or the development of highly efficient transportation methods. Additionally, the resulting water could contribute to further greenhouse effects, if not carefully managed. A day on Venus lasts longer than a Venusian year, meaning the planet's surface experiences prolonged periods of sunlight and darkness. This slow rotation contributes to the planet's extreme temperatures and complicates efforts to regulate its climate. Some have suggested using large orbital platforms equipped with reflectors or shades to create artificial day-night cycles, but this would require extraordinary precision and coordination. Despite the many technical challenges, studying these ideas is valuable for understanding planetary systems and the potential for altering them. Even if we never actually attempt to cool Venus, the knowledge gained from these studies could inform efforts to address climate change on Earth or prepare for future missions to other planets. For example, technologies developed for carbon capture or solar reflectors could have applications closer to home, helping to mitigate the effects of global warming. Ethical considerations also play a crucial role in discussions about altering Venus's atmosphere. Transforming an entire planet raises questions about our responsibility to preserve its natural state and the potential consequences of such actions. Venus, despite its harsh conditions, is a unique world with its own geological and atmospheric processes. Altering these processes could have unforeseen effects, not only on Venus, but also on the broader solar system. One of the first concerns is the question of whether humans have the right to alter another planet so drastically. Venus, as it exists today, is a unique world with its own natural history. By terraforming Venus, we would essentially erase this natural state, replacing it with conditions that suit human needs. Some argue that planets, like ecosystems on Earth, have an intrinsic value that should be respected, regardless of whether they are inhabited by life. While no direct evidence of life has been found on Venus, terraforming efforts, which would likely involve altering the chemical composition of the atmosphere or reducing its density, could wipe out any such life forms before we even have the chance to study them. This raises a moral dilemma. Should we prioritize human colonization over the potential discovery and preservation of extraterrestrial life, no matter how simple or alien it may be? Terraforming Venus would involve immense technological and logistical challenges, such as building massive solar reflectors to cool the planet, introducing microbes or chemicals to absorb carbon dioxide, or even engineering a magnetic field to protect it from solar radiation. These efforts would likely take centuries or millennia to achieve, requiring resources and energy on a scale never seen before. Critics argue that such resources could be better spent addressing problems on Earth. If humanity cannot solve its issues at home, should it really take on the responsibility of reshaping another planet? While the planet's current conditions are inhospitable to life as we know it, they represent a delicate balance of forces. Any attempt to change Venus's atmosphere or surface could have unintended consequences, such as creating new environmental hazards or triggering processes that are difficult to control. Once a terraforming process begins, it may be impossible to reverse if things go wrong. Proponents of terraforming argue that humanity has a responsibility to expand its presence beyond Earth. As the only known intelligent species capable of shaping its environment, humans have the potential to bring life to barren worlds. Terraforming Venus could be seen as an act of creation, transforming a dead planet into a thriving ecosystem that supports diverse forms of life. Supporters of this view often point to Earth's long history of environmental changes, including those driven by life itself, as evidence that planetary systems are not static, but dynamic and ever-changing. Terraforming Venus would be a project that spans centuries, with benefits that may only be realized by distant descendants. This raises questions about whether current generations have the right to make decisions that will shape the lives of future humans and the planet itself. Some argue that humanity has a duty to ensure its long-term survival, which may require colonizing other planets as a safeguard against existential threats like asteroid impacts, supervolcanoes, or climate collapse on Earth. However, there is also the risk of creating a precedent for planetary exploitation. If humanity begins terraforming Venus, it might set the stage for treating other planets and moons as resources to be used and reshaped at will. This could lead to a mindset where the intrinsic value of celestial bodies is ignored in favor of their utility to humans. Critics warn that such an approach could extend the environmental degradation seen on Earth to the rest of the solar system, perpetuating a cycle of exploitation rather than fostering a sense of stewardship. For centuries, Venus has inspired myths, art, and scientific inquiry. Its brilliant appearance in the night sky and its harsh, enigmatic nature makes it a symbol of both beauty and mystery. Some argue that transforming Venus into a second Earth would strip it of this unique identity, reducing it to a utilitarian object rather than a world with its own character. Preserving Venus in its natural state could be seen as a way of honoring its role in human history and imagination. Should we see ourselves as masters of the cosmos, shaping other worlds to suit our needs? Or should we adopt a humbler approach, recognizing that planets like Venus exist independently of human desires? These questions have no easy answers, and they reflect deeper tensions between technological ambition and ecological respect. The role of space mirrors and carbon sequestration. Efforts to envision a cooler, less hostile Venus often focus on two primary strategies: blocking the sunlight that fuels its intense heat, or reducing the greenhouse gases that trap that heat near the surface. Among the boldest ideas are the use of massive space mirrors and advanced carbon sequestration techniques. Space mirrors are an idea born out of necessity when considering Venus's unrelenting solar heating. These structures would be placed in orbit around Venus to reduce the amount of sunlight reaching the planet's surface. The concept involves deploying large, reflective surfaces made of lightweight materials that could block or deflect sunlight. By lowering the solar input, the planet's surface would receive less energy, potentially reducing its extreme temperatures over time. The scale of such a project is staggering. Venus receives about twice as much solar energy as Earth due to its proximity to the Sun, and its thick atmosphere ensures that much of this energy remains trapped. To make a meaningful impact, space mirrors would need to block a substantial fraction of this incoming energy, requiring mirrors that could span thousands of kilometers. This would be a feat of engineering never before attempted. The materials used for these mirrors would need to be incredibly lightweight, yet durable enough to withstand the conditions of space. Advances in nanotechnology and materials science might one day make this possible. Thin, reflective films made from materials like aluminized mylar or graphene could be ideal candidates. These films would need to be resistant to degradation from micrometeoroids and cosmic radiation, as well as capable of maintaining their position in orbit for decades or even centuries. Positioning the mirrors would require precise calculations and advanced propulsion systems. The most likely location for the mirrors would be at Venus's L1 Lagrange point, a spot between Venus and the Sun where gravitational forces balance, allowing objects to remain stationary relative to the planet. This placement would ensure that the mirrors effectively block sunlight without being destabilized by the planet's gravity or orbital motion. One challenge with space mirrors is maintaining their alignment over time. Even small perturbations from solar wind or gravitational interactions with other celestial bodies could cause the mirrors to drift out of position. Autonomous systems, equipped with ion thrusters or other propulsion technologies, would likely be needed to make constant adjustments and keep the mirrors in place. Another approach involves scattering sunlight rather than blocking it entirely. This could be achieved by deploying a swarm of smaller, reflective satellites rather than a single, massive mirror. These satellites, often referred to as a solar shield, would work together to create a diffuse shadow over Venus. While this method reduces the risks associated with a single-point failure, it also introduces complexities in coordinating the movement and positioning of thousands or even millions of individual satellites. Beyond the engineering challenges, the impact of space mirrors on Venus's climate would need to be carefully modeled. Blocking sunlight could lead to uneven cooling, with some regions of the planet experiencing more significant temperature drops than others. This could alter atmospheric circulation patterns and potentially create new challenges, such as increased wind speeds or unexpected changes in cloud cover. While space mirrors aim to address the heat input, carbon sequestration focuses on the greenhouse gases already present in Venus's atmosphere. The overwhelming concentration of carbon dioxide in Venus's atmosphere is the primary driver of its extreme greenhouse effect. Reducing this concentration would be a direct way to lower surface temperatures. One proposal for carbon sequestration on Venus involves chemically binding carbon dioxide into solid forms. On Earth, this process occurs naturally when carbon dioxide reacts with certain minerals to form carbonates. For example, carbon dioxide can react with calcium or magnesium to create calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate. These reactions are exothermic, meaning they release energy and result in stable compounds that do not easily revert back to carbon dioxide. Scaling this process to Venus would require massive amounts of reactive minerals. One idea is to use robotic systems to mine Venus's surface for these minerals and then distribute them into the atmosphere to facilitate the reaction. The resulting carbonates could be deposited back onto the surface, effectively locking away the carbon dioxide in solid form. An alternative approach is to use airborne platforms or drones to capture carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere. These systems could use chemical reactions or advanced filters to extract carbon dioxide and convert it into other compounds. The extracted carbon could then be stored in solid or liquid form, either on Venus or in orbit. This approach would avoid the need to operate on the planet's surface, where temperatures and pressures are extreme, but it would still require significant energy and infrastructure. Some researchers have proposed introducing external materials to Venus to facilitate carbon sequestration. For example, importing large quantities of hydrogen from other parts of the solar system could enable chemical reactions that convert carbon dioxide into water and other compounds. Hydrogen could potentially be harvested from the gas giants, such as Jupiter or Saturn, where it is abundant. However, transporting hydrogen to Venus would be a monumental challenge, requiring advanced spacecraft and propulsion technologies. The feasibility of carbon sequestration on Venus is limited by the sheer scale of the problem. Venus's atmosphere contains approximately 90 times more mass than Earth's atmosphere, and the vast majority of this mass is carbon dioxide. Even with the most advanced technologies, reducing this concentration would be a slow and resource-intensive process. Furthermore, the energy required to power these systems would need to come from sustainable sources, as introducing additional heat or pollutants could exacerbate the problem. Reassessing the habitable zone. Is Venus an outlier? The concept of the habitable zone, often called the Goldilocks zone, has long been a cornerstone in the search for life in the universe. This zone is defined as the range of distances from a star where conditions are just right for liquid water to exist on a planet's surface. Earth, with its moderate temperatures and abundant water, sits comfortably in this zone. Venus too lies within the Sun's habitable zone by many calculations, but its surface conditions are anything but hospitable. This stark contrast raises important questions about whether our traditional definitions of the habitable zone need to be reassessed. While Venus orbits closer to the Sun than Earth, it is not so close that its surface should naturally reach the extreme temperatures it experiences today. Instead, the planet's thick atmosphere has created a feedback loop that has turned the surface into a hellish inferno. This suggests that a planet's atmospheric composition and geological activity play just as critical a role in habitability as its distance from its star. If models of early Venus are accurate, Venus might have once been as hospitable as Earth, with a temperate climate and shallow oceans. During this time, the planet would have been a prime candidate for life, potentially harboring microbial ecosystems similar to those found on Earth. The eventual shift to its current uninhabitable state raises the possibility that Venus was once well within the habitable zone, only to fall out of it due to a combination of internal and external factors. The reassessment of the habitable zone also involves comparing Venus to other planets and moons in the solar system. Mars lies near the outer edge of the Sun's habitable zone and shows evidence of having had liquid water on its surface in the past. Despite its current cold and dry conditions, Mars's ancient environment might have been more similar to early Venus or Earth, suggesting that habitability is not a fixed state, but a dynamic process that can change over time. These comparisons underscore the need to consider the full history of a planet when evaluating its potential for life. Astronomers have discovered thousands of planets orbiting other stars, many of which lie within their star's habitable zone. However, without detailed information about an exoplanet's atmosphere, geological activity, and history, it is impossible to determine whether it is more like Earth or Venus. This realization has led to the development of more nuanced models that incorporate factors like atmospheric composition, stellar activity, and planetary mass into assessments of habitability. If life did emerge on Venus during its early history, it may have faced significant challenges as the planet's environment changed. Microbial life, if it existed, would have needed to adapt to increasing temperatures, higher pressures, and the loss of water. While Earth's biosphere has demonstrated remarkable resilience to environmental changes, the conditions on Venus may have exceeded the limits of adaptability. Understanding whether life could have persisted on Venus during its transition offers valuable insights into the resilience of life in extreme environments. Traditionally, the inner edge of the habitable zone is defined as the point where a planet's surface water would evaporate due to high temperatures. However, the example of Venus suggests that this boundary is not fixed and can shift over time. Factors like atmospheric composition, planetary size, and geological activity can influence where the inner edge lies. In some cases, planets that initially fall within the habitable zone may move out of it as their environments change. This dynamic view of the habitable zone complicates efforts to identify potentially habitable worlds, but also enriches our understanding of planetary evolution. Exoplanetary implications. Could supervenuses harbor life? The discoveries on Venus have sparked a wave of curiosity about exoplanets with similar characteristics, often referred to as supervenuses. These are planets that, like Venus, have thick atmospheres dominated by carbon dioxide and experience extreme surface conditions. The question of whether such worlds could harbor life, or even provide valuable lessons about planetary evolution, has become a significant focus in the search for life beyond Earth. Supervenuses are often found orbiting close to their parent stars, much like Venus orbits the Sun. The proximity means these planets are subjected to intense stellar radiation, which can lead to atmospheric conditions that are even harsher than those on Venus. Astronomers studying these worlds are interested in understanding how their atmospheres form, evolve, and interact with the surrounding space environment. The processes shaping these planets are believed to mirror those that occurred on Venus, offering a natural laboratory to test ideas about atmospheric chemistry, climate dynamics, and habitability. One of the key factors influencing the potential for life on a super-Venus is the thickness and composition of its atmosphere. These conditions are largely due to the high concentration of greenhouse gases and the absence of mechanisms to regulate their levels. If a super-Venus were to develop similar atmospheric properties, life as we know it would face almost insurmountable challenges. Venus is technically within the Sun's habitable zone, but its surface is far from habitable, a discrepancy that has led scientists to rethink the criteria for habitability, particularly for exoplanets. Super-Venuses that appear inhospitable at first glance might still have regions in their atmospheres where life could persist. These layers could be cooler and contain droplets of liquid or gaseous compounds that serve as potential solvents for biochemical reactions. Super-Venuses, as their name suggests, are typically larger and more massive than Venus. Their greater gravity could result in thicker atmospheres, amplifying greenhouse effects and potentially creating even more extreme conditions. On the other hand, their size might also enable them to retain lighter gases like hydrogen, which could influence atmospheric chemistry in ways that differ from Venus. This variability makes each super-Venus a unique case study, offering new opportunities to explore how planets evolve under different conditions. Planets that orbit close to their stars are often subjected to intense stellar winds and radiation, which can strip away lighter atmospheric gases over time. This process, known as atmospheric escape, has been observed in our own solar system, where Venus's lack of a magnetic field allowed the solar wind to deplete its water. If a super-Venus were to have a strong magnetic field, it might retain more of its atmosphere, potentially altering its surface and atmospheric conditions. Conversely, the absence of such a field could result in a barren, inhospitable world. If life were to exist in these extreme environments, it would need to adapt to high pressures, temperatures, and levels of radiation. Such organisms might rely on biochemical processes that are unknown to science, using solvents other than water or metabolic pathways that harness chemical energy from atmospheric compounds. Astronomers are particularly interested in super-Venuses that show signs of active volcanism. On Venus, volcanic activity is believed to play a significant role in shaping the atmosphere. These emissions can drive complex chemical reactions in the atmosphere, some of which might create temporary or localized conditions favorable for life. If similar processes occur on super-Venuses, they could provide clues about the potential for life on these worlds. Observing volcanic activity on exoplanets is challenging, but advancements in telescopes and spectroscopic techniques are bringing this possibility closer to reality. These planets occupy a middle ground between Earth-like worlds and gas giants, offering insights into the continuum of planetary types. By comparing super-Venuses to planets with less extreme conditions, scientists can better understand the factors that make a planet habitable. This comparative approach helps refine models of planetary evolution and improves the ability to predict which exoplanets might support life. In recent years, telescopes like the James Webb Space Telescope and ground-based observatories have begun to probe the atmospheres of super-Venuses. These instruments can detect the presence of specific molecules such as carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and water vapor, which provide clues about atmospheric composition and dynamics. They can also measure temperature and pressure profiles, offering a more detailed picture of the conditions on these planets. While current observations are limited to a small number of targets, future missions are expected to expand this catalogue, enabling more comprehensive studies. The detection of anomalies in the atmospheres of super-Venuses, similar to the discovery of phosphine on Venus, could reignite debates about the possibility of life. Such anomalies might indicate unknown chemical processes or, in the most optimistic scenarios, biological activity. However, interpreting these signals requires caution, as many factors can produce similar signatures. For example, volcanic eruptions, lightning, or photochemical reactions could all create compounds that mimic biosignatures. Distinguishing between these possibilities will require detailed observations and a better understanding of the chemistry and physics of supervenuses. Venus's transformation from a potentially habitable world to a hostile environment underscores the fragility of planetary climates and the complex interplay of factors that determine a planet's fate. By studying supervenuses, scientists can test these ideas in a variety of contexts, improving their understanding of the conditions that lead to habitability, or its loss. What if Venus had avoided the greenhouse effect? Venus, as it exists today, is a planet defined by extremes. But what if this wasn't the case? What if Venus had avoided the runaway greenhouse effect that turned it into the inferno we see now? It's a question that invites us to imagine an alternate reality, one where Venus might have retained oceans, a more temperate climate, and perhaps even life. In this alternate scenario, the story of Venus begins much like Earth's. Billions of years ago, Venus is thought to have had vast amounts of water on its surface. The key difference in this alternate history would be the preservation of these oceans. On present-day Venus, solar radiation split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, and the lightweight hydrogen escaped into space, leaving the planet dry. If Venus had been shielded from this loss, it could have retained its water, setting the stage for a completely different evolutionary path. Without a robust magnetic field, Venus's atmosphere was left vulnerable, and its water vapor was gradually stripped away. In our imagined Venus, a stronger magnetic field could have prevented this, allowing the atmosphere to remain stable and water to persist. On Earth, carbon dioxide cycles between the atmosphere, oceans, and crust, regulated by plate tectonics and life. If Venus had developed plate tectonics like Earth, the planet's crust might have absorbed and stored this carbon dioxide, preventing it from overwhelming the atmosphere. If Venus had started with a slightly different balance of gases, perhaps less carbon dioxide and more nitrogen or water vapor, it might have been able to reflect more sunlight and maintain cooler temperatures. Clouds could have played a key role, forming a reflective layer that prevented excessive heat from reaching the surface. In this alternate reality, a temperate Venus might have had climates ranging from tropical regions near the equator to cooler poles, much like Earth. Oceans would moderate temperatures, creating weather patterns driven by the interaction of water, land, and air. Rain would nourish the land, and rivers might carve valleys and deltas. With such conditions, life could have emerged in Venus's oceans, evolving over billions of years into increasingly complex forms. Life on this alternate Venus might look very different from life on Earth, shaped by the planet's unique conditions. For example, Venus's slow rotation, where a single day lasts longer than a Venusian year, would create unusual patterns of sunlight and darkness. Plants and photosynthetic organisms might adapt to this slow cycle, storing energy during long days and conserving it during equally long nights. Alternatively, life might evolve to thrive in tidal pools and coastal regions, where the interplay of water and land creates rich ecosystems. Without the intense heat and crushing pressure of its current state, the surface might have developed more Earth-like landscapes. Mountain ranges could rise where tectonic plates collide, and volcanic islands might dot the oceans. Venus's towering volcanoes, such as Maxwell Montes, might still exist, but would be surrounded by fertile plains and forests instead of barren rock. With billions of years of stable conditions, it's possible that advanced civilizations could have arisen. These hypothetical beings would have faced challenges unique to their planet, such as adapting to the slow rotation and the higher levels of solar radiation. Their culture, technology, and exploration would have been shaped by their environment, creating a world as diverse and complex as Earth's. When looking at distant worlds, researchers consider a range of factors, including the planet's distance from its star, its atmosphere, and its geological activity. Studying Venus provides a cautionary tale about the potential for planets to become uninhabitable despite initial similarities to Earth. It also raises the question of how many other Venuses might exist in the universe, planets that once had water and the potential for life but were transformed by runaway greenhouse effects. This imagined temperate Venus reminds us that planetary evolution is not a straightforward path. It's shaped by countless variables, from the size of the planet's core to the composition of its atmosphere to the behavior of its star. Each of these factors interacts in complex ways, leading to the diverse array of worlds we see in our solar system and beyond. By studying Venus, we not only learn about the history of our neighboring planet, but also gain a deeper appreciation for the conditions that allow life to thrive. The Venusian Dyson sphere, harnessing solar energy in the upper atmosphere. Venus orbits closer to the Sun than Earth, receiving nearly twice the solar radiation. This abundance of energy makes it a prime candidate for large-scale energy collection. However, the planet's surface conditions render ground-based operations almost impossible. The upper atmosphere, on the other hand, presents a more accessible and manageable environment. A Venusian Dyson sphere, an advanced energy harvesting structure, wouldn't take the traditional form of an all-encompassing shell around the Sun, as envisioned in some science fiction. Instead, it might manifest as a vast network of energy-collecting platforms suspended in the upper atmosphere. These platforms could utilize advanced materials to remain buoyant in the dense carbon dioxide-rich air while capturing solar energy. Such structures might look like massive solar sails or floating photovoltaic arrays, designed to harness the Sun's energy efficiently while resisting the corrosive effects of sulfuric acid clouds. Even with current human technology, researchers have proposed using aerostats, large helium-filled balloons, to support scientific instruments in Venus's upper atmosphere. Scaling up this concept, a civilization with advanced engineering capabilities could deploy networks of interconnected aerostats equipped with solar panels. These platforms could remain stationary relative to the planet's surface or move with the atmospheric currents, ensuring optimal exposure to sunlight. For an advanced Venusian civilization, it might support vast technological systems, sustain an artificial biosphere, or even power large-scale terraforming efforts. Alternatively, if such structures were built by an external civilization, Venus could serve as an energy outpost, collecting and transmitting solar power for use elsewhere in the solar system. Wireless energy transmission using focused microwave beams or lasers could deliver this power to orbiting spacecraft, bases on other planets, or even back to the civilization's homeworld. One of the challenges in imagining a Dyson sphere-like system on Venus is the planet's thick cloud cover. These clouds reflect a significant portion of incoming sunlight, contributing to Venus's high albedo and limiting the amount of energy that reaches the surface. However, in the upper atmosphere, above most of the cloud layers, sunlight is far more intense and unobstructed. Platforms stationed in this region could capture solar energy directly, bypassing the reflective barrier below. Unlike structures in Earth's orbit, which must contend with microgravity and occasional debris, platforms in Venus's atmosphere could rely on buoyancy for support. The high concentration of carbon dioxide provides a medium that can sustain lighter-than-air materials, allowing structures to float naturally. This stability would reduce the energy and resources needed for maintenance, making the system more efficient in the long term. A civilization constructing energy-harvesting platforms in Venus's skies might also exploit the planet's atmosphere for raw materials. Carbon dioxide could be processed into carbon-based building materials or fuels, while sulfuric acid might be broken down to extract sulfur and oxygen. These resources could support the construction and operation of the Dyson sphere-like network, creating a self-sustaining system that draws everything it needs from the surrounding environment. By capturing and redirecting solar energy, the platforms could reduce the amount of heat reaching the planet's surface, potentially mitigating the greenhouse effect. Alternatively, they could focus energy to specific regions, driving atmospheric changes that align with the civilization's goals. Venus as a testbed, simulating alien biospheres for future colonization. Venus presents an extraordinary opportunity for scientists and engineers to test the limits of bioengineering in one of the harshest environments within our solar system. By treating Venus as a testbed, humanity could develop the tools and knowledge needed to colonize alien worlds with similarly unforgiving landscapes. The first step in this endeavor would be understanding how life can adapt to Venus's unique environment. Although the planet's surface is far too hostile for any Earth-based life forms, the upper atmosphere offers a more promising environment for experimentation. The conditions create a relatively habitable zone, albeit one shrouded in clouds of sulfuric acid. This region could serve as a starting point for bioengineering experiments aimed at creating life forms capable of surviving and thriving in extreme conditions. These engineered microbes could serve multiple purposes. One possibility is their use in atmospheric processing. Microorganisms could be designed to consume carbon dioxide, the primary component of Venus's atmosphere, and convert it into less harmful compounds, such as oxygen or solid carbon. This approach, often referred to as biological carbon sequestration, would not only help to mitigate the planet's runaway greenhouse effect, but also create a more hospitable environment for future colonists. Additionally, such microbes could be tailored to produce materials needed for constructing habitats or other infrastructure, effectively turning Venus's atmosphere into a resource for colonization efforts. Another area of focus could be the development of bioengineered plants or algae capable of surviving in Venus's upper atmosphere. These organisms would need to be resistant to both the intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun and the corrosive effects of sulfuric acid. Genetic engineering techniques, such as CRISPR, could be used to introduce traits from extremophilic organisms into more robust species of plants or algae. If successful, these organisms could play a critical role in producing food, oxygen, and other essential resources for human settlers. Testing these bioengineering solutions on Venus could provide invaluable insights into the challenges of colonizing exoplanets. Many of the rocky worlds discovered in other star systems share characteristics with Venus, such as thick atmospheres rich in carbon dioxide or high surface temperatures. By experimenting with life forms on Venus, scientists could simulate the conditions of these distant planets and develop strategies for adapting to them. This research could also inform the search for extraterrestrial life, offering clues about what forms life might take in environments vastly different from Earth. Beyond biological adaptations, Venus could serve as a proving ground for integrated ecological systems. A self-sustaining biosphere, capable of recycling nutrients and maintaining balance in a closed environment, would be essential for long-term colonization of any planet. Venus's upper atmosphere, with its unique combination of challenges, provides an ideal setting to test these systems. For example, researchers could deploy small, contained habitats equipped with experimental ecosystems to see how they function under Venusian conditions. These habitats could include a mix of engineered microorganisms, plants, and even small animals, all designed to work together in a carefully controlled environment. The lessons learned from such experiments would extend far beyond Venus. They could inform the design of life support systems for missions to Mars, the Moon, or even deep space voyages. The knowledge gained from creating sustainable ecosystems in extreme conditions could also have applications on Earth, particularly in areas affected by climate change or other environmental challenges. For instance, bioengineered crops resistant to heat and drought could help address food security issues in arid regions. If humanity can learn to create and sustain life in Venus's hostile atmosphere, it would demonstrate a level of technological and biological ingenuity that could be applied to worlds far beyond our solar system. The ability to adapt to such conditions would not only expand the range of planets considered habitable, but also increase the likelihood of finding life elsewhere in the universe. Of course, there are significant ethical considerations to take into account. Introducing bioengineered organisms to Venus, even in a controlled manner, carries risks. There is always the possibility of unintended consequences, such as the organisms evolving in unexpected ways or disrupting any native chemical processes that might be important for scientific study. To mitigate these risks, researchers would need to establish strict protocols for containment and monitoring, ensuring that experiments do not interfere with the planet's natural state. The planet offers a unique combination of conditions that cannot be replicated in any laboratory on Earth, providing an unparalleled opportunity to push the boundaries of what is possible. By tackling the challenges of Venus, scientists and engineers could pave the way for humanity's expansion into the cosmos, transforming our understanding of life and its potential to thrive in even the most extreme environments. Could we seed life? Exploring directed panspermia on Venus. Directed panspermia, the intentional introduction of life to another planet, is a concept that has long been debated among scientists and futurists. Microbial life would be the logical first candidate for such an experiment. Introducing microbes to Venus would not be a simple task. First, researchers would need to select or engineer organisms that can withstand the planet's specific conditions. Venus's atmosphere is composed mostly of carbon dioxide, with small amounts of nitrogen and traces of other gases. The clouds, thick with sulfuric acid droplets, pose an additional challenge. To survive, microbes would need to be resistant to the acid, while also finding a way to extract nutrients and energy from the surrounding environment. One possibility is to use photosynthetic microorganisms that can harness sunlight for energy. The upper atmosphere of Venus receives a substantial amount of solar radiation, making it a potential resource for sustaining life. Certain types of cyanobacteria, which already thrive in extreme conditions on Earth, could serve as models for bioengineered life forms designed for Venus. These organisms could be modified to not only survive, but also contribute to a larger terraforming effort. Another approach could involve chemotrophic microbes. These organisms often use sulfur or other inorganic compounds as their energy source, a trait that could be highly useful in Venus's sulfur-rich atmosphere. By introducing chemotrophs, it might be possible to establish a self-sustaining microbial ecosystem in the planet's clouds. If such an ecosystem could take hold, it could serve as the foundation for a larger process of atmospheric transformation. Microbes could be engineered to produce byproducts that alter the chemical composition of Venus's atmosphere over time. For example, some organisms might convert carbon dioxide into organic compounds, gradually reducing the greenhouse effect that makes the planet's surface so inhospitable. Others might produce compounds that neutralize sulfuric acid, creating pockets of less hostile conditions within the atmosphere. This process would likely take centuries or even millennia to have a noticeable impact, but it could be a step toward making Venus more habitable. The long timescales involved raise important questions about the feasibility and ethics of directed panspermia. Even if it is technically possible to seed life on Venus, should we? The introduction of Earth-based organisms to another planet would represent a profound intervention in its natural state. Some argue that this could interfere with any native chemical processes or even pre-existing forms of life that might still exist in Venus's clouds, albeit in forms we have yet to detect. The potential benefits, however, are difficult to ignore. If successful, directed panspermia on Venus could provide a wealth of scientific knowledge. Studying how life adapts and evolves in such a unique environment could offer insights into the limits of biology and the potential for life on other planets. It could also help to refine techniques for terraforming or creating self-sustaining ecosystems, both on Venus and on other worlds. Some view the spread of life as a natural extension of evolution, with humanity acting as an agent of panspermia on a planetary scale. Others see it as an unwarranted intrusion, a violation of the intrinsic value of untouched worlds. These perspectives reflect a tension between our desire to explore and shape the universe and our responsibility to preserve it. To address these concerns, any attempt at directed panspermia would need to be preceded by thorough scientific study and international consensus. Venus would need to be studied in greater detail to ensure that no native life forms or prebiotic processes are present. This would likely involve sending advanced probes or even crewed missions to the planet to gather data and conduct experiments. The development of bioengineering techniques for creating microbes suited to Venus's atmosphere would also require careful oversight to minimize risks and ensure ethical compliance. If Earth-based organisms can survive and adapt to Venus's atmosphere, it might suggest that life could arise in similar conditions elsewhere in the universe. This could have profound implications for the search for extraterrestrial life, as it would expand the range of environments considered potentially habitable. Conversely, if efforts to seed life on Venus were to fail, it would also provide valuable information. Understanding why life cannot take hold in Venus's atmosphere could help to refine our models of habitability and improve our ability to assess the potential for life on other planets. In this way, even unsuccessful attempts at directed panspermia could contribute to our broader understanding of biology and planetary science. If we can develop the technologies and techniques needed to introduce life to Venus, these tools could be applied to other planets and moons in the solar system. For example, similar methods could be used to create self-sustaining ecosystems on Mars, or to explore the potential for life in the subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus. By starting with Venus, humanity could take its first steps toward becoming a truly interplanetary species. The cloud cities of Venus, imagining floating colonies in the atmosphere. The idea of floating colonies in the atmosphere of Venus has been in public consciousness for decades. The planet's upper atmosphere presents temperatures and pressures that are surprisingly Earth-like, making this layer one of the most temperate places in the solar system outside of our planet. It is in this relatively hospitable zone that visions of floating habitats, cloud cities, have begun to take shape. These floating habitats would rely on the principles of buoyancy, much like airships on Earth. Venus's atmosphere is dense, composed primarily of carbon dioxide, which is heavier than breathable air. This means that a structure filled with nitrogen and oxygen, the same mix we breathe, would naturally float. By carefully designing habitats to optimize this buoyancy, it's theoretically possible to create stable, floating cities in the Venusian skies. A floating habitat would need to be both lightweight and durable, able to withstand the harsh conditions of Venus's upper atmosphere. While temperatures are milder than on the surface, they still hover around 75 degrees Celsius in some areas. Additionally, the atmosphere contains sulfuric acid clouds, which are highly corrosive. Materials would need to be chosen or developed that are resistant to acid and capable of withstanding high temperatures, while remaining light enough to allow for buoyancy. The basic structure of a floating colony could resemble a large airship or a cluster of interconnected platforms, each equipped with its own buoyant system. These platforms could be tethered together to create a sprawling city in the sky, complete with residential areas, research labs, and agricultural zones. The outer surfaces of the habitats would likely be coated with advanced polymers or alloys designed to repel acid and protect against corrosion. Some concepts also suggest using a thin layer of liquid water as a protective shield, as water can neutralize sulfuric acid and provide additional insulation. Venus receives more sunlight than Earth due to its proximity to the Sun, making solar power an obvious choice. Advanced solar panels could be installed on the tops of the floating platforms, harnessing the abundant solar energy to power the colonies. In addition to providing electricity, this energy could be used to drive chemical processes that produce water, oxygen, and other essential resources from the atmospheric components. Agriculture in the cloud cities would likely involve hydroponic or aeroponic systems, which use minimal water and soil. These methods are already being tested on Earth as part of efforts to grow food in extreme environments. Plants could be grown in enclosed, controlled environments within the habitats, protected from the acidic atmosphere outside. The carbon dioxide-rich environment could even be an advantage for plant growth, as plants use CO2 for photosynthesis. With careful management, the colonies could become largely self-sufficient, producing their own food and recycling waste to sustain life. Transportation between the floating platforms and other parts of the colony would need to be efficient and safe. Small airships or drones could serve as shuttles, moving people and supplies between different sections of the city. For communication with Earth or other space missions, satellites in orbit around Venus could relay signals, ensuring a constant link with the rest of humanity. A colony in Venus's atmosphere would be an unparalleled vantage point for studying the planet's climate, geology, and atmospheric chemistry. Instruments aboard the habitats could monitor weather patterns, analyze the composition of the clouds, and search for signs of microbial life. These studies could provide valuable insights not only into Venus itself, but also into the processes that shape planetary atmospheres and climates across the solar system. Establishing a permanent presence in such an extreme environment would demonstrate the technological and logistical capabilities needed for colonizing other planets and moons. It would also provide a unique testing ground for life support systems, resource extraction technologies, and other innovations that could be applied to future missions. Stories often depict gleaming, futuristic habitats suspended above the clouds, bustling with human activity. While these depictions are often idealized, they capture the essence of what could one day be possible. Modern concepts for cloud cities are more grounded in science, but no less ambitious. NASA has even proposed a mission concept called HAVOC, or High Altitude Venus Operational Concept, which envisions sending airships to Venus's upper atmosphere as a precursor to human exploration and potentially permanent habitation. By harvesting resources from Venus's atmosphere, such as carbon dioxide and sulfuric acid, it might be possible to produce building materials, fuels, and other necessities locally. This would reduce reliance on supply missions from Earth and make the colonies more resilient in the long term. Technologies for extracting and processing these resources are still in their infancy, but advances in fields like synthetic chemistry and material science could bring them closer to reality. Living in a floating colony on Venus would undoubtedly present challenges, from maintaining air quality and temperature control to dealing with the psychological effects of isolation and confinement. However, these are challenges that humanity has already begun to address through long-duration space missions and research into human factors in space exploration. Lessons learned from the International Space Station and planned missions to Mars could be applied to Venusian habitats, helping to ensure the health and well-being of their inhabitants. Exotic chemistry, exploring the limits of non-carbon-based life on Venus. Could alternative forms of biochemistry, such as silicon or sulfur-based life, thrive in the conditions Venus offers? Carbon is the foundation of all known life on Earth because of its versatility. It can form stable bonds with many other elements, create complex molecules, and support the intricate processes needed for life. But carbon is not the only element capable of these feats. Silicon, which shares many chemical properties with carbon, has long been considered a candidate for supporting life in environments unlike Earth. Silicon's ability to form 4 bonds, just like carbon, makes it theoretically capable of creating complex molecules and structures. However, silicon also has significant differences that would shape the nature of any life forms based on it. One major limitation is its tendency to form rigid crystalline structures rather than the flexible chains and rings that carbon creates. On Earth, this rigidity makes silicon more suitable for forming rocks and minerals than the dynamic molecules of life. But in Venus's high-pressure, high-temperature environment, silicon-based molecules might behave differently. The extreme conditions could favor chemical reactions and molecular formations that are rare or impossible on Earth. For example, silicon could combine with oxygen to form silicones, which are more stable in heat and resistant to corrosion. These materials could serve as the building blocks of life forms capable of withstanding Venus's punishing conditions. Sulfur is another intriguing candidate for alternative biochemistry. On Earth, sulfur plays an important role in the metabolism of some microorganisms, particularly those that live in extreme environments like deep-sea hydrothermal vents. On Venus, similar processes might sustain hypothetical life forms adapted to the acidic clouds. Sulfur-based life would require a fundamentally different metabolic system than the carbon-based life we know. Instead of relying on oxygen to break down organic molecules, these organisms might use sulfur compounds as both an energy source and a structural component. For example, sulfur chains could form the equivalent of proteins or cell membranes, creating a stable framework for biological processes. Such life forms might even produce sulfuric acid as a waste product, making the surrounding environment more hospitable for their growth. The possibility of silicon or sulfur-based life raises questions about how such organisms would store and transfer energy. On Earth, life depends on molecules like adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, to power cellular processes. In Venus's extreme environment, alternative energy carriers would be needed. Hypothetical silicon-based life might use silicon-oxygen bonds to store energy, while sulfur-based life could rely on high-energy sulfur compounds. These systems would likely be far less efficient than Earth's biochemistry, but they could still function in the unique conditions of Venus. The lack of liquid water on the surface eliminates a key solvent for most known biological processes. However, the upper atmosphere contains trace amounts of water vapor, along with more temperate temperatures and pressures. This region has sparked speculation about the potential for life forms that exist as aerosols or microscopic particles suspended in the clouds. If such life exists, it might exploit the abundant sulfuric acid as a solvent or structural component, creating entirely novel biochemical pathways. On Earth, some microorganisms protect themselves from radiation by producing pigments or forming protective layers. Similar strategies could be employed by hypothetical Venusian life, using silicon or sulfur compounds to create reflective or absorptive coatings. Alternatively, these organisms might evolve mechanisms to repair molecular damage quickly, ensuring their survival in a hostile environment. The planet's atmosphere is in constant motion, with high-speed winds circulating heat and chemicals around the globe. This dynamic environment could create microhabitats where conditions are more favorable for life. For example, cooler pockets of air at higher altitudes might provide a refuge from the intense heat of the lower atmosphere. Atmospheric forests, speculative organic structures in Venus's skies. The concept of atmospheric forests on Venus envisions vast organic structures that could transform the planet's toxic skies into a more habitable environment. These hypothetical entities, whether naturally evolved or bioengineered by humans, would act as colossal air purifiers and resource generators, floating within the temperate zone of Venus's atmosphere. Drawing from both biology and engineering, these atmospheric organisms or structures could serve as a radical approach to terraforming, tackling the challenges of Venus's dense carbon dioxide atmosphere and its acidic clouds. The basic idea revolves around creating plant-like organisms or artificial analogues that could thrive in Venus's upper atmosphere. While the air is far from breathable and contains droplets of sulfuric acid, this region offers the closest thing to a potentially habitable environment on the planet. If life, whether natural or engineered, could be designed to survive here, it might provide the foundation for large-scale atmospheric modification. In nature, photosynthetic organisms are capable of transforming carbon dioxide into oxygen, using sunlight as an energy source. On Venus, sunlight is abundant, even more so than on Earth, making it an ideal energy source for such processes. Atmospheric forests could consist of floating colonies of photosynthetic organisms suspended by buoyant structures, or even their own metabolic processes. These organisms might resemble algae or other microorganisms, clustering together to form dense, self-sustaining communities. They could absorb carbon dioxide from the surrounding air and release oxygen as a byproduct, gradually altering the atmospheric composition over time. Bioengineers could take this concept further by designing synthetic organisms specifically adapted to Venus's conditions. These organisms might be created using tools like CRISPR or synthetic biology, incorporating traits from extremophiles. By combining these traits, scientists could create a new form of life capable of flourishing in Venus's skies. One speculative vision involves massive, tree-like organisms that float freely in the atmosphere. These organisms could have balloon-like structures filled with lighter-than-air gases, keeping them aloft in the dense carbon dioxide environment. Their leaves, or surface membranes, could be coated with photosynthetic cells, capturing sunlight to power their metabolic processes. Some designs might include specialized roots or tendrils that extract trace elements from the surrounding atmosphere, providing the nutrients needed for growth and reproduction. Another possibility is the development of artificial bioengineered systems that mimic the functions of natural organisms. These systems might consist of networks of lightweight, flexible materials embedded with synthetic cells capable of photosynthesis and chemical processing. Unlike natural organisms, these systems could be designed to operate on a larger scale, with modular components that can be assembled into vast floating platforms. Such platforms could serve not only as atmospheric purifiers, but also as habitats for human colonists, incorporating living spaces and resource generation systems into their design. By removing carbon dioxide from the air and converting it into oxygen, they could gradually reduce the planet's greenhouse effect, lowering temperatures and creating a more stable environment. Over time, this process might even allow water to condense in the atmosphere, forming clouds and precipitation. While it's unlikely that Venus could be transformed into an Earth-like paradise, these changes could make it significantly more hospitable for human habitation and exploration. To make a noticeable impact on the planet's climate, atmospheric forests would need to operate on an unprecedented scale, covering vast areas of the sky and processing enormous quantities of carbon dioxide. This would require not only advanced bioengineering, but also significant logistical and technological support, including the development of systems for deploying and maintaining these structures in the harsh Venusian environment. Atmospheric modification on a planetary scale would take centuries, if not millennia, to achieve meaningful results. This raises questions about the sustainability of such efforts and the willingness of humanity to commit to a project with such a distant payoff. However, smaller-scale applications of the technology could provide immediate benefits, such as creating localized zones of reduced acidity or generating oxygen for use by human explorers. Similar concepts could be applied to other planets and moons with dense or toxic atmospheres, such as Titan or even Earth in the distant future. With other wild ideas like this, humanity could expand its presence across the solar system and beyond. So what other crazy ideas would you like for us to cover next? Send us your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing. Thanks for watching.